I have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful and strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I am Kalil, and with me today is the Sam Stanley to my Chet Desmond.
Let's see, with the overall equipment that we have inside the area, between the laptop, the microphones, the audio device, as well as this coffee, it looks like that our equipment totals around, I would say, about $2,678.
Now, Mr. Sam Stanley, I am so happy to have you join me. Do you have a name?
Oh, yes, it is the Unplugged Professor. Welcome me back. Thank you very much. Hi, guys. How's it going?
And it's good to be back. Full disclosure off the bat. You may have noticed that this episode is a part 1 scenario. This will be in multiple steps. That is because originally we had tried to do all of Fire Walk with Me in one podcast. And Professor, how did that go?
We did it again and again and again and again and again. And again, there's like 3 versions of this podcast, guys, and there was just like something I wasn't quite clicking too much at the time. So we're trying our best to try to find a way to segment it that we think that will be much better for a general listening experience. And in fact, when you kind of consider the Deer Meadows as well as some of the extra spices in the background of Laura Palmer's story, it's almost like a Twin Peaks episode buffer going into Fire Walk with Me as a whole, which I would argue is generally Laura Palmer's story.
Yes. So today we're going to allow ourselves to talk a little bit about Laura if it comes up, but primarily our focus is on Deer Meadow and the FBI office scenarios in Philadelphia. Anything else related to Laura's story isn't the focus today. We're not going to avoid it necessarily. It's just not on our list of agenda.
Oh, no, absolutely. And it's not as if we're trying to take a break purposely from Laura Palmer after all that Laura Palmer content we had last time. All the Laura Palmer.
Hey, it was really good. And just as I know that the diary was very overwhelming and uncomfortable for you at times, most times of the book, your experiences with the Fire Walk with Me have also been a bit strong. Because we initially tried to record this 2 months ago, you've had some time to settle. Do you want to run the listener through what did you think of the movie the first time you saw it, and then on subsequent reviewings as time has gone by?
I've seen this movie so many times. Listener, just so you have a little bit of an idea of what happened. When I first saw the movie itself, I was in a weird dreamlike state myself. I was walking around the apartment nearly silently, just looking at things as if I just was having the idea of existence around me. I can't really describe fully into words what happened to me after the first viewing of Fire Walk with Me, but it was genuinely an experience. And we kept sort of watching it again and again and again and again. I don't have that much of a visceral reaction at this time, but I still do appreciate what the movie does. And the shadow of that feeling still lingers. So overall, no, I think that I really did enjoy the movie overall.
And one thing that kind of has me curious then with your reaction is that initially when Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me had debuted in theaters, it had a very mixed reception.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, when you watched the movie, at any point did it leave you feeling oh, this isn't quite Twin Peaks?
No, I mean, the film feels like it is, if it's not something that feels like Twin Peaks, it feels like something that is complementing or rhyming with Twin Peaks. There's obviously some great performances that we see throughout it from fantastic souls, such as the aforementioned Laura Palmer. We see some fantastic performances from Leland. And all those portions, I think that it
Cheryl Lee and Ray Wise.
Yeah. I think that oozes Twin Peaks and is very, very good in quality. I think that the reflections that we see inside of Deer Meadow is also Twin Peaks, but inside of a twisted sense. I think that this is still Twin Peaks. It just might not be the Twin Peaks other people have viewed, because I think that that's just general media. I think that when someone views the same thing, the same SpongeBob SquarePants episode, they'll come out with different reactions themselves, though the memes may stay strong.
I'm not sure how to respond to the SpongeBob comparison. What I will say is I almost feel like this movie was kind of doomed for this reception because it had 2 problems going against it. One is that someone who loved the show's quirkier, sillier, lighter soap opera tone, they go to this and it's just instant darkness. and its instant heaviness. And it never really lets up. There's some moments of jokiness and levity, but they are so rare and infrequent. It's a needle in a haystack situation. The needles of joy in the haystack of misery. And the other problem is that if someone went in without the baggage of Twin Peaks and they just, David Lynch has a new movie out, I'm going to go see it, and never saw the show, then they run the risk of being even more lost than the average Twin Peaks viewer because it's already like really dense and confusing for someone who knows the show, let alone someone who just goes in blind. And by the time this came out, it had already been like a year or so after the show had been canceled.
Yeah.
So I feel like it had so many factors working against it that this like 2-hour film sequel to a show that's tonally very different from said show, but still relies on the show for context, it had a subsection of a subsection that would really love it.
Yeah.
But that is a niche audience that loves this movie. And I don't know if I'd say cult classic. The show itself is kind of a cult classic, but I feel like as time has gone on, people have really turned around within the community. And at this point, Fire Walk With Me is really popular.
Yeah. I would say that I welcome myself within the cult within a cult as we chant our Garambosia. Garmonbosia. I'm still new to the cult, so
Okay.
I'm getting the chanting
It's
down.
okay. It's like we got to make sure everyone's good at the etymology and lingo. So, Fire Walk With Me, a little bit about it before we jump in. It's written by David Lynch and Robert Engels, who I think it's interesting to see Robert Engels' involvement. We don't usually see most of the writers and directors on board. Mark Frost is notably not really part of this operation. It was directed by David Lynch singularly. According to the co-writer Robert Engels, an early draft of the film was originally going to be set in 1954, specifically the night of President Dwight D. Eisenhower's inauguration. And according to the Twin Peaks wiki, and according to what Robert Engels had said, this was going to, quote, explain Bob and the Black Lodge inhabitants' reasons for wanting to go home on the series.
Yeah, Bob. How confident are you on that sentiment?
I'm not confident that happened in the version we saw. I don't think anything was explained.
Clearly, you and I watched two different entirely.
I think the word explained in the synopsis of Fire Walk With Me feels a little out of place, to be honest with you. Not to say the show is, has no answers, but it's definitely not the kind of thing that the main thesis of the movie is explaining you stuff.
Yeah, honestly, whenever it comes to the idea of something being explained, I think that it'll be an interpretation, but I do not think that anyone will have the one singular answer as far as this goes for Twin Peaks. I also have to ask, is that would this opening that we got in Deerwood Meadow change?
Meadow.
It's definitely has a deer and a meadow, and I'm getting
There's no
those
wood.
portions right.
There's no wood.
I want there to be wood. I'm so used and accustomed to wood in Twin Peaks. We open on wood every time.
Would you not?
I would. But yes, would the intro of Deer Meadow exist if J. Edgar Hoover...
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Same thing.
No, not at all. Not the same thing. One's a vacuum cleaner. But no, I don't know if that would belong or not because that's such a different concept, right? Like, if it was set in 1954, was it going to jump from 1954 to 1989? I don't know. Was it going to talk about Laura at all? I don't know.
We'd eventually get to Laura.
That's such a different concept for a movie that it wouldn't feel right in what we got right now.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned confidence. I don't necessarily want this type of movie. Like, I'm glad we got the movie we got instead because I don't want things explained like that. It depends on what explain means here.
Yeah.
If they're going to give me an origin story for Bob and the Black Lodge inhabitants, I would have not wanted that.
I feel that it may have been in the theme that this film might have explained things, but it's being told to us in a language that has never been spoken before.
Right.
So
right.
It's definitely something to dig at the mind with, and of course, what could have been. But I don't mind if we pass those on our train route. I think that what we got was very nice, and I'm enjoying it.
Yes. Like I was saying, though, not everyone necessarily was enjoying it. When it debuted at the 1992 Cannes Film Festival, it received booing from the audience. It was met with negative reviews across the United States. I'd say the majority of critics were against it, from what I understand. The film fared poorly in the box office in the United States, and it just generally was incomprehensible to a lot of people, baffling to fans. However, it was a hit in Japan. Ooh, commercial success even.
Big in Japan.
In Japan, the movie was known as Twin Peaks: The Last 7 Days of Laura Palmer.
That is way more ominous.
Yeah, even before The Ring, that's still a very ominous title for a Japanese movie.
Yeah, this was before The Ring, like actually years before The Ring, correct?
Yeah.
So
Later 90s.
So 7 days didn't quite exist, and I can't keep track of days in Twin Peaks whatsoever. So the fact that they could narrow it down to the number 7, I'm also impressed with.
Is it even 7 days in the movie?
I don't keep track of time.
I don't think it
is. It's probably a month. It's probably an hour. I don't know. It's somewhere between there.
On one hand, the title does more pointedly show that it's the end of Laura Palmer's story, but at the same time, that title doesn't encompass the fact that 30 minutes of the movie aren't Laura Palmer. It's what we're talking about today.
Maybe one of the days was with the Teresa Banks situation, so that does also count as one of the days that we'll bring over. It's just not in order 7 days.
And you mentioned you did enjoy the movie. You liked the aspects of it. What would you say are some of the differences in terms of the writing, visuals, or music this time around?
This time around, overall, I think that there is definitely a different vibe generally with the music, but I gotta say, I'm a very proud owner of the vinyl. I think that there are points in which the sounds just get horrifyingly rough if we talk sound design alone, such as inside of Hap's Diner, where there's just like that deep crackling that goes over various people's voices. I enjoy the deep soothing sax at the beginning where you're just sort of settling in, watching everyone's names pass by for an incredibly long amount of time.
Yeah, it lingers.
Yeah, no, I think that the overall songs inside of this have a great sense of settling the viewer down into a vibe, but also not being afraid to also give them a little bit of a jolt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that opening in general, I think, sets up the difference between this and the original show quite heavily. The original Twin Peaks opening is obviously very iconic, and every time we watch an episode, you would insist we have to watch the opening, and I always like watching the opening too, so it wasn't definitely something you weren't forcing me to do.
It was necessary, and if it wasn't for the fact that there was immediately a recap at the end of the episode, I would probably also force you through every credit sequence. Instead, we watched about half of it.
But that opening that we watched every single time, there's like saw blades and some elements, I guess, that are a little imposing, but the music is much more relaxing and somber. You have imagery of the woods, the waterfall, the bird, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this movie opens up with that sort of mysterious sensuality of the saxophone, then abruptly destroyed by the smashing TV, the screaming of no, and then we're brought into our, like what you said, kind of like a prologue section with Dear Meadow.
Yeah, it's even like a large juxtaposition, because you think like with this soft saxophone, you would imagine like a detective voice going over. It's like, it was a Sunday. It was when that time that I saw that woman walk through my door. But no, instead it's just like da-da-da, boom!
Well, and I think it's fun to entertain the meta angle too, that the idea of smashing the TV that had already gone to static, it's almost like the show had ended, you were on the wrong channel, you hadn't set your frequency right, it's been sitting on static for a while, and now any expectations you had of your TV show happening, we're going to smash that with an axe. Which kind of reminds me of the tone that Lynch is bringing here. He's trying to, very directly, very bluntly tell you this is not going to be the TV show.
Or you could almost extend that to life itself, but we can probably talk more about that when we see the blue static again, shall we?
We are certainly welcome to talk about your life problems and whatever else baggage this is bringing up. Writing-wise, there's not really, like I mentioned, much humor. But like the humor that is there is super dark. There's that guy in Hap's Diner who's like saying all the time, "Are you talking about that little girl who got murdered?" He says it like 2 or 3 times. I think that was meant to be funny, but I don't know. Like, you can't prove that that's humor. Like, it's like, I think that's funny.
We must take it to the joke court immediately. This must be judged whether it is humor or not. No, it's hard to say at various points whether it is just going for style or if there is something of a point of levity. It's still the oddness that I do welcome that I usually find in something of Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
But it's put in such a bleak place that it is a little bit hard to say. I think the point played for humor probably was when, shortly after Stanley, crotch, coffee.
No more word association?
I think that gets the point across.
Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, probably the most jarring difference right away is the lack of familiarity. Like, you see Gordon Cole early on, but the majority of the first 30 minutes you are spent with 2 new characters in a new place. So Chet Desmond, A little bit of background on him.
Chet Desmond. Just say the name again. Chet Desmond.
Full name, Chester Desmond.
But Chet Desmond. It sounds like Ace Detective. It sounds like something you're going to see right on top of a little, like, detective novella. Chet Desmond.
So the name is a reference to the movie Sunset Boulevard.
Okay.
From 1950. It's a movie that, again, at some point, Professor, I'm going to, like, Clockwork Orange style, strap you to a chair and force your eyeballs open, and we're going to watch it. It's named after the character Norma Desmond, whose name is also, people believe, taken to be Norma Jennings as well. But Norma Desmond is like one of the crucial characters of the movie, if not the main character. And that is further increased likelihood of being the source of the name because Gordon Cole is also a reference to Sunset Boulevard.
Okay.
So opening up with two characters directly linked to Sunset Boulevard, is Sunset Boulevard important for this movie? Maybe. The actor behind Chet Desmond is the music artist Chris Isaak. I showed you a few of his songs prior to this recording, so you kind of get a vibe of what his career was like in the late 80s going into the 90s.
Okay.
And what were some things that stood out to you about the kind of music he made?
I would say that it's very much feels like it was from the time. It feels very almost atmospheric. It's something that really emphasizes his range in vocals, just his voice sort of droning on and on. Overall, it definitely felt like something I'd expect in the background of a passionate romantic film, something that could flirt with the soap opera sort of angle if you were to incorporate that into film.
Well, you mentioned it being of its time. I think that's curious. It's hard to dilute the 1980s into like one type of music. I think there's tones of that sort of dramatic haziness to the songs.
Dramatic haziness,
but it also harkens to the 50s, is what I was going to say.
Okay.
I think there's a bit of that sort of Elvis quality to his vocals, that there's a bit of blues, right? There's a bit of that blues smoothness to it that, especially some of the more upbeat songs that we were listening to, I think fits in line with the sort of diner atmosphere, but more sedated, more sensual, more mysterious. So suffice to say, Chris Isaak was a fairly popular musician. He has one like huge song called Wicked Game that he's mostly known for. If you ever hear about him, it's probably for that one song. He had his peak around the late 80s, early 90s when Lynch scooped him up for this movie. He's not primarily known as an actor. Yes, sir.
The act of scooping.
So
how did Lynch scoop him up?
I don't know the story
behind this. Did he just like open up his door and just like...
I know Lynch has had over the course of his life and career a lot of music friends. I don't know how he scoops them up.
Scoops them up.
Probably closer to like a fishing analogy would be more apt with Lynch, but suffice to say again that Chris Isaak is not primarily known for his acting. He's known for his music. I don't know of him being anything else other than Fire Walk With Me. He might have, he might not have, but it's not his main thing.
Would you say David Lynch is known for scooping?
Anyway, so what I was going to ask you, Professor, is what did you think of Chris Isaak's performance as this character?
I think that he does a nice, different detective. He does something which is like a no-nonsense, getting things done, and almost like a rascal sort of situation. I'm thinking...
oh, you rascal, you.
Rascal, like, not like rascal OU, like rascal, like... Kind of like the rascal, like Han Solo. Just like someone who sees something, will get it done, and also makes excuses on why he's getting it done for. And then mix that in with some more focus on the job with a little bit of Dale Cooper inside there. So, yeah, no, I think that he's a more... he's a good rhyme, a good response to what we got from Dale Cooper as a detective, I think.
I agree that that's what's going on in the writing for the most part. And this might be heresy to say, I'm not really sure. I don't particularly like Chris Isaak's performance as this character.
Okay.
I do think that the writing of the character is as you describe it. He's much more matter-of-fact, blunt, and in a little bit of a way, a little more callous in how he responds to certain things.
Yeah.
But you get the sense that this is kind of the style that served him best. Cooper's the weirdo who talks about like trees all the time. I can't picture this guy doing that. The thing with Chris Isaak, though, is I don't feel like in this particular performance he gave the sort of resolute, strongman determination, kind of imposing atmosphere that I would want out of this character. He just seemed kind of like sleepy. Like I would have wanted a performance here that was a bit more charismatic. You brought up Han Solo, so I'll bring up that idea of that sort of rough charisma.
I think that as far as like the charisma goes, I don't know if I get that much out of Han Solo myself.
Oh.
I think that myself, I get more of the rough end. I think that there's still some dusty Liam Neeson throughout it, and I'm fine with that. I think that having someone who is just basically like on the job and just gets frustrated with the people around him being like, no, let's keep this moving, let's keep this going. I'm done with playing these games. I like that performance. I do think that this is just a good balance, especially since I think that if you would play too hard or play too much on the charisma angle, I don't know how well that would play off of Sam Stanley.
Yeah.
I think that then it might like over dilute with Chet Desmond instead of like be that balance, which I think I appreciate from the performance.
In terms of the personality and the writing again, one thing I thought was kind of strange upon rewatching is his insistence when he's talking to Sam Stanley that they're just not going to sleep. Like, they're just going to stay up at the diner. And, like, on one hand, I could read that as this is someone who doesn't want to waste any time. He doesn't want to miss opportunities of going to the diner at night and extracting information. But, like, when you talk about not sleeping, it brings to mind how Cooper, toward the end of the show, was like meditating instead of sleeping. And like that could be dangerous for someone who needs to keep their head in the game.
Yeah.
And also, this is a bit of a stretch, but I think this is a movie that invites stretches. When do you dream? When you're sleeping? How much of Cooper's investigative abilities are just dreams?
Now, there's some arguments that we could certainly get into this. Well, how far do you get into the sense of daydreaming? How do you get into one's sense of mind? What sort of thoughts that come through meditation can either parallel or be compared to or be considered dreams?
I just think it's interesting that at the moment where most people would be sleeping and dreaming, instead Chris Isaac goes to the investigation. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for him or somewhere in between? I don't know. I just think it's interesting considering how important dreams are for this film.
I think that dreams are certainly important, but also what people do around them or what they do to avoid them, what they do to avoid life itself. And I think that that certainly does aid into, well, Chet Desmond's fate as we continue on.
You're on the same page as me as well, that the whole thing with Sam Stanley with the coffee, that was him pranking him, right?
He was
like noticing how Sam was so fidgety, and he was like holding the coffee cup so tightly that Chet was just like, hey, what time is it? Just to get him to look at his watch and tip the coffee over on himself, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Making sure we're on the same page on that.
Yeah, no, I think that we are on the same page on that. I think that it is something, because that immediately, like, looks straight at the watch. I don't think it was considered as like, yeah, no, he's got a watch. No, I think that was completely in the favor of, all right, Sam, we got to like calm this down. It's like it's getting late. It's like, and then he's still in that focused state. It's like, no, it's early. It's early.
And that does kind of indicate that Chet Desmond has a sense of humor, but unlike Cooper's, it's a lot more mean-spirited. You could argue that maybe he did the coffee prank to teach, Sam a lesson and wake up, but he still laughed at it. Like, he was enjoying it. He wasn't like dispassionately trying to prove a point.
He was laughing, but I think it's also in that sort of sense of like, okay, this is where the joke's at. I wouldn't call it fully mean-spirited, but I would definitely call it in that very much a dig and a jab sense of humor. It's almost as if like flirting with Albert Rosenfeld levels, but not quite there.
How do you imagine a mission would go between Albert and Chet Desmond together on a team?
Incredibly quick. Both of them do not want to deal with absolutely anything else. So I think that if you want a streamlined project done, it's just like, okay, let's get past these yokels. No, please, we're going to get this information. No, we're not going to stop right here. No, we will take the body aside. Like, I think that they would be so much on the same wavelength that
Dream Team.
We would have a speed run of a movie.
Is that a dream team or is that imbalanced? Like too much of the same mindset?
I think that I think you do need Sam Stanleys out there.
Stam Stanley.
Stam Stanleys. Because I think that there are points in which flirting or like digging deeper into mundane details at the time, though in like excess, it's a bit unhealthy. If you move too quickly, there's so much that you can leave behind in the wake. That can be some important nuance.
Sure.
So I think that there is necessary balance. Well, necessary.
Fair enough. We don't have a lot of information from the movie itself about the background for Chet Desmond. He had a previous assignment that we're able to see the end of, where he is in Fargo, North Dakota.
Now, we don't know it's the end. We know that it's in process.
He's at a culminating point, I would imagine, because he's standing near a school bus with screaming children inside as he's handcuffing two women, with 3 officers standing by.
Yeah.
One of the officers is patting down the driver of the bus and holding a gun. Another one's holding a gun at the driver.
I really like this. I have a bias myself. It turns
To
out...
screaming children?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But
Bus
not
drivers
just-
with guns held to them?
Absolutely my favorite movie genre. But beyond that...
Really big fan of Drive. What's the movie? Speed? You're a really big fan of Speed, huh?
Yep, sure. I don't know that. Anyway,
I think that's the movie with the bus.
it probably is.
With like a bomb underneath it and...
Kalil, I don't see media. Media
watched this
sees
movie?
me. Media sees me. I don't see it. So
does it
maybe
even-
eventually it'll drive
When
past
Fire
me.
Walk With Me looked at you, what did it see?
It saw potential. Anyway,
Good for you.
as someone who is a little bit biased because I did live in North Dakota for some time, and seeing North Dakota inside of a film, especially in this very wild scenario, it was thoroughly entertaining. I get my whole flatlands with patches of trees off to the side, but also the weirdness of like, how did we get to this place? What were the events which we never uncover? It's just Gordon Cole saying that we need to get in contact with this man, and this is exactly what he's doing at this time.
I'm sure it all tied directly to Dwight D. Eisenhower.
It's also fun because from what I did read is that Twin Peaks was at one point considered with North Dakota, like there was working titles with North Dakota inside of it, which would have been fun parallels with Fargo, but things just didn't work out that way in the end. So having like this movie open around that spot, it's almost like just a fun reference, in my mind anyway.
Yeah, Frost has said in an interview with Inside Twin Peaks that the original title for the show was going to be North Dakota. But he said the title lacked the sense of mystery that lurked within the show's settings of forest and faraway plains.
Ooh, North Dakota!
Again, I'm
alive!
This is one of those cases where, yeah, I'm glad we got what we got instead, because the woods are so vitally important to Twin Peaks.
Yep. There's like, as far as like me who has lived in North Dakota, there's like patches of trees. Like just imagine like them like wandering out in just like blank plains for hours on end. That'd be the mood.
No waterfalls either.
No waterfalls. You would see maybe a little bit of like a lake, maybe like water spinning in a circle. But yeah. We have a mysterious like base that looks very creepy that used to shoot missiles down around the Cold War. So could be a cool.
That could tie into the Dwight D. Eisenhower plotline.
Exactly. See, it should have happened. But no, I'm glad for where we did end up.
Sure.
But I'm also glad that we took a pit stop in North Dakota. But as Twin Peaks called more than North Dakota before, Gordon Cole is calling Chet Desmond away from North Dakota as he goes on to his little phone inside of his vehicle. And might I say, it's very strange when you get a phone call from someone, you know, and you put the antenna down. Like, you know, the receiver, the antenna to speak to someone, especially with someone who needs ample extra volume to speak to, such as Gordon Cole.
I'm not sure if we're supposed to read into that or not. Like, at first, I always just kind of naively assumed he's lowering the antenna because somehow that connects to the volume of this man dogging.
Yeah, I don't...
But I'm like, that's not how antennas work. And if I read into it, well, then I'm thinking, what is the antenna for? Well, that's for the frequency. That's for the waves, the signals. And then my mind starts getting to electricity.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, no, is it really supposed to be that he's like lowering that to prevent like dark forces from activating the call or something?
Well, let's face it, there is a lot of like interesting resonance when like Gordon Cole speaks louder when he does do the antenna trick. Again, interesting choice.
It is, especially considering things we learned about, you know, obviously Gordon Cole and Chet Desmond later in the movie and the implications of everything going on.
Oh, yes. Electricity, indeed, wouldn't you say, Gordon Cole? But, well, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine, right? Right, Kalil? Well, he's just sending him off, like, to a little bit of a quest, if you will. Off to Oregon.
And the primer for the whole movie is, I guess you would say, Deer Meadow at large, but this whole situation that happens with Lil feels like a tutorial, but also kind of a call out at the same time. Like a weird, it's a little bit patronizing, but also like helpful. It's a weird mix, in at least how I'm interpreting it.
Yes, Lil, who is introduced along with Sam Stanley to Chet Desmond, meeting up together with Gordon Cole. We get to this nice little air carrier space with a nice little plane. The plane is yellow and has a black lightning bolt. Isn't that interesting? Electricity.
No, it could add to nothing.
You're right. You're right.
And Gordon Cole introduces Lil as, she's my mother's sister's girl. He then does a hand gesture.
Can we connect that mother, sister's girl? Wouldn't that just be a niece?
Yes.
Yes. She is my niece.
Well, that is a plot point, too, is that something's missing from that, which is the uncle. So that deliberate wording is brought up later in the conversation.
Yep.
So anyway, he says that, and then he does the weird hand gesture where it's like his hand is upside down with the fingers over his eyes, at which point there's the understanding between the two, federal, and they nod.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I'm still like caught up on the whole entire like uncle thing. Just because I understand federal, and I understand like how we're.
Do you understand federal?
I do understand federal.
Okay, I don't know if I do.
How would you describe like a mother sister's girl? Would you say mother sister's girl who also has the uncle? How do you incorporate the uncle here? How do you put the key of the uncle? Why is the uncle missing?
Well, because it's like the missing person in the situation. I guess the uncle / brother-in-law, I guess you would say, right?
Yeah, so he's like, she's my sister's, but also brother-in-law's girl.
I don't particularly think every single clue here makes sense.
Yes.
Nor do I think it's trying to. But I'll call out one of the ones later, too.
Yeah.
In the car ride after the fact, after Lil does her thing, Sam Stanley is asking Chet Desmond what that was all about.
Yeah.
And Chet Desmond says he's going to explain it to him. So we get Chet Desmond operating as, again, a tutorial for Sam Stanley to understand what sort of clues are pertinent to their investigation. I think it's one of the more obvious cases of meta-narrative, though, where I'd have a hard time believing it's not meant to also be for the audience.
I think that it is something in which, like, to keep an eye out for small details. It can be both toying with the subject, but also be saying, hey, probably look out for these small details along the way.
Like, it is not even a stretch to assume this section is David Lynch, the director, deliberately looking at the viewer and saying, all right, I'm going to give you this one. I'm going to explain this one to you so you know what to look for the next 2 hours, because things are going to get whack. Like, that has to be what this is. And so we get a few different things. Lil's wearing a sour face because they're going to have problems with local authorities.
Yes.
Makes sense. I actually think that one pretty clear. And then Sam asks, like,
Clear
sour
with
face.
quotations.
Sam asks, like, sour face, and Chet's explaining is, yeah, her face has a sour look to it. So there's that sense of sometimes you just need to, like, see it for how it is, hear it for how it sounds.
I mean, yes, on one hand, like, you could say that it certainly is that way. I would be afraid if, like, it was a sense of, like, oh, she has a sour face. But, like, Sam Stanley was like, oh, wait, she's constipated. The local authorities will be constipated when we arrive. We should probably pick up laxatives.
That is where we take things too literal. You can't take it that literal.
Yeah.
You have to look at what it gets weird. You have to look at it for what it is plainly, what it seems like plainly, but not overly literal. They have both eyes blinking means trouble higher up, the eyes of the authority. I guess you could argue the strain of the blinking seems a bit like aggressive with the blinking. But I definitely get the eyes of the authority part. That makes sense. You're being watched. Sure. One hand in the pocket means they're hiding something. Sounds good. The other hand's a fist. They're going to be belligerent. You're with me so far. Doing great.
Yep.
Walking in place, a lot of legwork involved. Then we get to the mother, sisters, girl thing, which is, like you said, really weird. And then the conclusion is that the sheriff's uncle is probably in federal prison. Wait, what? Like, that's the jumping off point logically from that. So, like, that one to me seems like a real stretch, which, you know, if you're meant to take this as a, like, kind of like a meta-narrative thing, there's going to be some things that are going to be presented to you that you're going to maybe try to, like, figure out a situation. But, like, what's the odds of someone hearing mother, sister's girl and being like, oh, yeah,
the uncle's
in federal prison.
Yeah.
Then we get my least favorite one, which is the dress is altered to fit her is code for drugs.
Yes.
And this one's weird because instead of it really being explained or self-evident, Chet just says, oh, yeah, that's code for drugs.
I mean,
he just says it's code for drugs. There's not really like a given reason, and like outfits altered to fit someone, you could try to rationalize how that could be about drugs.
Yes.
But you could rationalize that about anything, though.
I would say, like, there are some, like, precedents to it. I'm not saying that I'm going to make some good examples here, but one could say that for the alter to fit, not only with the overall Stancy style, which was a big sort of front whenever it came to something such as the big drug boom around the late 80s, early 90s. But there's also the matter that when something is altered in its form, to better fit its new form. One could say that that is the process of drug making itself, such as the reprocessing of things such as cocaine on one's own.
I mean, I just think of the sense of altered states of consciousness and altered states of things that are going on.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking, though, if you're told that this dress being altered to fit the person is a metaphor for something, how many guesses would it take for you to reach drugs?
I'm wondering if wear of clothes is just the general, like, use of the case, if that's just the central sort of point of, like, this is what the case will be. In case that's a shorthand for the overall agency. If that is the case, pun. Tell me, what other crimes do you think an altered dress or this dress would ever invoke?
Well, for one, you're not led to believe for sure that the altered dress relates to the crime.
Mm-hmm.
What evidence is there of that?
I'm not saying that there's any direct means of evidence. I'm just trying to think in the minds of, like, okay, there has to be a central theme and what the necessary crimes that are involved to investigate. There has to be something to sort of investigate overall. Now, mind you, there's all sorts of things going on with Lil. Okay? I'm thinking to myself, if I were in an agency, okay, if I were trying to make some code, I would want the general message, the big point of the message, to be one thing that is consistent throughout. And if there's one thing that I can change but also stay consistent with any operative, it would probably be the attire. And so that's why I'm thinking that the general case, the drug case, fits in this dress. Meanwhile, if there's any sort of other case such as espionage, murder, or anything like that, maybe the attire would change too.
But it isn't a drug case. They're not going there to investigate the drug aspect. In fact, of all the clues they're given, the drug information might be one of the least important. So that's also kind of my countering to the idea that it's so vital it's in the clothing. I'm thinking over here that the fact that there's drugs involved turns out to have very little to do with this.
I would say that it's
neither why she was killed nor where she went.
But it is the dressing, if you will, on the case. It's something in which everyone blames the death on. It's that she was doing a lot of drugs. That is what she is known for. It's cutting clothes. That's the excuse Dear Meadow does for Teresa Banks.
I think you're putting an admirable show of defending it. I am definitely not sold.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're going to be able to sell me in the context of this podcast, to be completely honest with you. I feel like the dress altered to fit her is an example of something where it's a kind of clue that is so out of left field that you wouldn't take that to mean that. Like, especially if this is a tutorial for how to interpret Lynch films. Well, that's kind of like indicating some things that you're going to be shown are going to mean something to David Lynch, but it's going to be so completely out of left field that it's a 1 in like 50 shot of guessing this. You're throwing something at the dartboard. At least for me, there might be a real world precedent within like the FBI that altered dresses equal code for drugs. There might be something obvious that I'm just missing here, but on its own, I could figure out the others kind of. This is the one where I'm kind of like what you said about the uncle situation. I'm a little bit confused about it.
Yeah, no, I get it. So
the most mysterious, though, above all these, is the blue rose, which is pinned onto the dress. And an ominous sort of song starts playing at the time that this is brought up. It's a change in the soundscape, and Chet Desmond very clearly says, "But I can't tell you about that."
Yeah.
And this continues to bother Sam. Even after this conversation in the car, you could tell that Sam is bothered by the blue rose because everything could be explained, but not this.
Yeah.
Why do you think he can't explain it?
Well, for one, there is a note later on in the film with Dale Cooper, who does make a note that this is Gordon Cole's blue rose cases, at least one of them. There apparently that there is some idea, at least in the upper ranks, of what a blue rose case even means. So that means that there's some importance.
What do you think a blue rose case is?
Well, getting into that, we have a blue rose, okay? Blue is not a natural color, believe it or not, for roses. It's something of its own altered form. Blue is a common color that we've seen throughout the film, especially in the use of static electricity. It's something in which is between the channels and between the mind. So I'm wondering if it is a case in which it's showing that there is a lot of unknowns inside the mystery itself, and the use of a rose. A rose is oftentimes a very common flower to use, especially whenever it comes to either a romantic angle or whenever someone has passed away. I've noticed a lot of use of rose iconography for there. For me, I think it is something in which it's easy to get in deep on, and there's a chance that he might not be coming back. If not, maybe there's even a guarantee he's not even coming back.
Yeah, in terms of common symbology, a rose is often seen as something that's representing beauty, but then it's blue, so it's synthetic, it's unnatural, it's altered in some way. Like there's something off about this that can't occur in nature. And then more literally, and thinking of imagery from Twin Peaks, the closest thing I could think of to a blue rose in the Twin Peaks show is the opening image of Laura Palmer wrapped in plastic, the way a bouquet would be wrapped in plastic. And when one has been dead for a long time in the river, you're going to start looking a little blue.
Yeah, probably.
So the idea of a girl wrapped in plastic that looks sort of blue in a bouquet of flowers in this situation, I think there's a little bit of that overlap that the blue rose kind of like checks a lot of boxes.
And Kalil, it's as like you mentioned before about someone named Axl Rose saying every rose has its thorn. Isn't that correct, Kalil?
Yes, allegedly that is the case. So is your understanding then that the Blue Rose case elements are what Gordon Cole was referring to when he said that Chet Desmond has his own modus operandi? Like, is the idea here that Chet Desmond's going in with the same information that Sam has, with the exception that Chet has an alternative extra motivation? He's doing something else on the side that Sam doesn't necessarily have the access to.
I think that this is sort of protecting this little sheep from going in too far. I think that it's less about an additional motivation, but more so trying to finish up the job he already started and trying to keep Sam out of the dirtier bits.
Okay, so it's for Sam's benefit.
For Sam's benefit more than anything. I don't think that if you are going in for a potentially deadly mission, you want to bring in the person who's clueless on how deadly it can be.
Let's talk about this clueless guy, by the way. Sam Stanley, some background. He was referenced in the pilot, in the very, very beginning of the original series, only by name. Like, he wasn't an established character. But Cooper is talking to Diane in the first Diane conversation ever on the drive to Twin Peaks, and he says he wants Albert on the job because he feels like he has his act together more than Sam does.
Speed run Albert.
So you would agree with that statement?
I do agree with that statement. However, I still adore Sam Stanley from my own personal takes, but I still also adore Albert, and I know that Albert's probably going to get things moved along, if you will.
So what are your overall impressions on this character?
Sam Stanley, my overall impressions is it's a fresher face. It is someone who I imagine that the audience could latch onto a little bit easier, especially when it comes to the point of overanalysis. I think that there's some fun quirks with the character. I think that there is almost like he is the most focused person in the cases, though it doesn't always hit the mark. It's like the person who stares at the dartboard more than he actually hits the mark.
Yeah.
No, he's just generally a fun time. I think that the performance on this was probably one of the most standout in the Deer Meadow arc.
So you like the performance by the actor Kiefer Sutherland?
Yes, I did like the performance from the actor Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, I think he's playing against what we now view his type to be. Like, I don't know if at this time he had cemented himself as the gruff action hero, but when people think of Kiefer Sutherland now, they think of like 24, or they think of like Metal Gear Solid. Like,
all things I've not seen.
Well, 24 was a TV show on Fox that basically he just fought terrorists all the time, and it was like an action show constantly.
Neat.
So the idea of Sam Stanley as an action hero, like just fighting terrorists, like process that idea. They're almost opposite personalities. I haven't seen 24 either, but I've heard plenty about it. There's this really good video by this YouTube channel called John Bois or John Boys. It's Bois. French.
Boys.
Who knows? But John Boys on YouTube, there's this video about 24 and all the people who die in the show 24. It's very entertaining. He has like infographics of it's great stuff.
If you want heavy spoilers for 24.
Yeah, if you do not care at all about the spoilers, but you just want to see how ridiculous 24 was when you look at the numbers of who dies and how they die and why they die. It goes through like how many of his friends and girlfriends die, how many presidents die in the course of like 4 or 5 seasons. It's great. I'll show you sometime, Professor.
If you care about numbers in the show called 24.
Yes. Anyway, as far as Sam Stanley's background, he's not fighting terrorists. He's from Spokane, Washington originally.
I mean, you could say that he's fighting terrorists in one way or another. He is working for the FBI.
Sure. He's also known as the man who cracked the Whitman case. We know nothing about that, but he has had some previous success. This isn't someone who's totally green. He hasn't come from the academy and knows nothing.
Yeah.
He has cracked an important case, and it's enough that Chet Desmond's heard of him.
He's also cracked a few nails.
And Cooper's heard of him too.
Yes.
So he's not a total nobody. He does have a bit of a show-off personality, but I think it's almost out of insecurity because when it feels like he's ever getting any positive recognition, you could see him grin and kind of lord over it. When he was told in the car after noticing one of the details on Lil that he, Gordon said you were pretty good. You see him just kind of perk up yeah, I am pretty good.
Some of us appreciate positive affirmations. Let's go ahead. Let's try this out. You say something positive about me, Kalil.
I think that you...
This will take way too long.
Your skin is not fully flammable.
You see, if I took that as a compliment, I feel like I would have smiled.
That was the first thing I thought of.
You heard it here, folks. My skin's not flammable.
Fully flammable. It's flammable. Fully. If it... it's not a walking, fire danger warning, you can have fires near him.
I'm smiling for a different reason, but yes.
Fire,
I agree.
walk with me. And then there's that moment where Sam estimates the cost of all the furniture in the department, and you could tell he's super proud of his ability to process that number and figure that out.
Which, by the way,
he feels like he's contributed to the case. We may agree or disagree on that, but he definitely feels in that moment I've done a thing.
I mean, he did do a thing. I think that it's very important that we find out the value of all their belongings because it certainly seems like an interesting establishment, to say the least, especially compared to the rest of what we see of Deerwood Meadow. I think that it's good to kind of keep track on what these suspicious figures are keeping on their person, how the funds are being translated, and if there's something on the side, which we do find out a little bit later.
See, whereas I read it as a situation that, again, this is all subjective, I look at the way that Chet Desmond is reacting, that Chet Desmond couldn't care less the amount of value of the objects in that room. And it's okay, good job, Sam. Good job. But it doesn't really matter. It feels like on an allegorical level, Sam Stanley's kind of a stand-in for the viewer who reads so much into very, very specific details that they kind of miss the forest for the trees, that they're kind of just so zoomed in on these unimportant details that they're missing the bigger picture. So that's kind of the feeling I get from Sam. Is that a fair view do you think? Do you think Sam is like that or not?
I think that is a fair assessment onto the character, but it also makes it very important for, again, as I mentioned before, balancing with someone like Chet Desmond, who is someone who is very much direct on his own angles and just is, laser focused on what needs to be done.
He's so direct and objective that maybe he would miss the small details. That's fair. I get the sense that because he handles the Lil situation so well, he definitely isn't oblivious, though. He does notice the important stuff. And then there's also that situation with the nicotine, where Sam Stanley feels it very important to, correct someone in conversation that, no, in fact, you do take drugs because nicotine's a drug, which prompts the response, who's the towhead, from Irene.
But yes, drugs. Sorry, I think that it's just important to let people know that drugs in this film, drugs.
Okay, well, we'll get to the Marilyn Manson song here in a moment. No worries. He also is known to drink his coffee with a lot of cream, based on the look of the color of the coffee. His coffee looks almost like hot chocolate. That's how, diluted it kind of looks. And I think in a show where coffee is so important, at least in original Twin Peaks, I think that says something that he's kind of got that sort of sugary, creamy sort of variety instead.
Yeah, no, I think it does harken to a little bit more on the innocence end on it. If I could just mention something quick. For this movie, when I kind of heard Sam Stanley mention the drug angle of coffee's drug, nicotine's drug, I thought to myself, yeah, that's right. I try my best to there's a huge theme on drugs throughout Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
And there are connections with the Black Lodge and the use of drugs. And just to consider like coffee as well as cigarettes and their usage as drugs, that makes perfect sense, especially with Dale Cooper now being so tied to the lodge himself, which the only drug use that I can imagine him doing is enjoying some nice coffee. In fact, if we compare it to like on opposite ends, coffee as black as a moonless night at midnight, or however you jumble those words for the actual quote, as opposed towards the pure white milk that he has going to sleep before bed, you could almost say that the use of coffee itself is something that tries to like take away from you having that presence of sleep, having that sense of rest, having your body go through its natural function, something that could be considered more pure. It is something to avoid that state, as opposed towards the use of something such as milk to try to calm you into that presence of sleep. So yeah, it kind of...
Well, I get all of that. I still feel like the thing that stands up to me is the social awkwardness of pointing that out to someone you're asking these questions to for like an investigation. It just feels like a very out of left field thing to interrogate someone with, where it's like, I don't do drugs. Well, actually, ma'am, you do, because nicotine's a drug, coffee's a drug. And she's just going to look at you like, okay. It just feels like now's not the time, Sam.
Now's not the time, Sam, but Sam, you've opened my eyes. So thank you. Thank you so much.
He does react very strongly to Carl Rod's coffee later. So again, more evidence that he's not used to the strong coffee.
No, he is not used to the more bitter ends or going too far into this realm.
So when you look at Chet Desmond and Sam Stanley being our FBI stand-ins for the first chunk of the movie, do you feel like there's a parallel with them to Cooper and anyone else? Like, this isn't Cooper and Sheriff Truman, right? Like, do you view these two as anyway reflections of Cooper, of anyone in Twin Peaks? Where do these two fit in relative to the show to you?
I mean, relative to the show, it certainly is they're their own two characters. They are each other's, I believe that the term is foil. They're people who play off each other very well. In their positions, if we take it very literally, one is a detective and one is more so of an analyst. So that would probably be close
Cooper
to
and
Cooper.
Albert.
Yep, exactly. But as far as people who are just more so, I would almost call relative strangers with somewhat of a bond, not many. Not many would really perk up beyond that. So, yeah, the closest one, Cooper and Albert.
It does feel like its own thing, much more than a parallel.
Yes.
Okay. We do get a parallel police station, which I don't know about you, but I do view this as like a reflection
I think that
sheriff's office.
I think that
Twin Peaks.
everything that goes on to here is a twisted form of Twin Peaks in a sense. Is a much more smaller area. I feel like it feels far more compact.
Yes.
The police office is very interesting. The only amount of housing that we see instead of log cabins is just one singular car park.
Trailer park.
So I think that it certainly does feel like something that is similar to Twin Peaks, but not in the same ballpark.
Inside the sheriff's office, we have a prominent buck imagery. There are horns on the sign outside leading into the office. There's a deer head on the wall. And then opposite that wall, there is a deer photo. So there's all this kind of repetitions to deer and particularly bucks with antlers. What do you make of that? Because it feels it's too direct and repetitive to not be like on purpose, especially for Lynch.
It shows a fair amount of pride, I would have to say. Like, whenever I think of things such as the presentation of buck imagery or hunting imagery, especially with the guns on the wall, or like how we see inside of Cable's office, like him having some proud papers as well as him like bending steel, I think that there is like a hefty amount of pride inside of here, and in some places very misplaced. It's like the overall relishing in one's own sense of power, if you will. So I think that having like memorabilia inside there that just focuses on themselves more than the town itself is important.
Well, and also maybe the way that they view law enforcement, because there's something kind of eerie about tying law enforcement to someone who hunts animals and mounts their like bodies on the wall.
Now,
that's kind of concerning considering what police are meant to do. They're not hunters.
Now, mind you, this could also be us like over and analyzing Sam Stanley style, and it could be like bucks are deer. This is deer meadow.
It could be.
There are deer in this meadow,
It
guys.
could be very well that.
All we need is pictures of meadow, and then we have deer meadow.
Deer meadow, a female deer.
No, no.
Inside we have the anti-Lucy and the anti-Andy. Feel pretty comfortable calling them that.
Which, by the way, as far as the anti-Andy goes, anti-Andy, he's literally dragging his feet. You can hear him like moving towards there with just like a fierce means of reluctance, which again feels opposite of someone like Andy, who seems like happy to be there, except when there's a murder.
Well, and the happiness he does show is giggling at them, laughing at the fact like it's gonna be a while, guys.
Yeah, no,
it's taunting.
The law enforcement is dragging their feet, even like trying to respond to them. Like it doesn't seem like there's anything of like very large importance that they're working on at the time. It's just they're relishing again in that pride, in that power. They are just letting them be there. It's like, yeah, nope, you can wait. It's gonna be a while. Enjoy the 2-day-old coffee and just like snicker, snacker.
Twix bar, I agree. And one thing that's similar is that it appears anti-Lucy and anti-Andy do still have their chemistry together, even if it's been inverted. The coffee was fresh about 2 days ago. When that joke is made, they both start explosively laughing at like the same time.
I would say that for the most part, whenever I think of Lucy, I think of someone who does kind of like talk for a while, who is very much engaged in the conversation and is definitely trying to get a point across. I don't think that the anti-Lucy had a line.
No,
not
she
one.
She just giggled.
She just giggled. That is her line. Giggle, giggle, giggle.
Then we have anti-Andy actually obstructing the FBI's access to talk to the sheriff. Deliberately blocking Chet Desmond's way until Chet,
it's like
does a nose pinch.
It does a nose pinch. It's like seeing a scene inside of an action movie where someone's looking at like a cobra, like straight in the eyes before like gripping for the neck, or in this case, the nose.
Yes.
And just bring him down by his nose. Again, that what I feel like is an action movie or action detective move from Chet Desmond, which, again, that's some points for me.
But could you just imagine like Cooper doing that in this situation?
No, not whatsoever. I do not recall many cases where Cooper has gotten physical.
Well, and even if he is physical, the act, like that sort of aspect of it, like pulling someone down by their nose, that's a very physical action. I could see, like, if it came down to a life and death moment, Cooper tackling Jean Reno before he shoots someone or something.
I can see someone being pushed aside. I can see someone being stopped. But it seems like it's just like such a sensitive like spot you're just being like pulled on.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it is very much, he is pulling the reins on this horse, and it is very uncomfortable.
And I think we both agree that the sheriff's department here is awful in Deer Meadow.
Yes.
But in their defense, I do want to bring up a question. Like, I was noticing some discussion in this Facebook group. I think I've mentioned them on the pod before. Twin Peaks Between Two Worlds. Someone was talking about, I wish I would have wrote this down. I need to start writing these things down. Noted that we're not even really sure if the FBI had the sort of access to this information the way they did for Laura, because one of the plot points in the pilot was that Cooper was able to come in here, and this was an FBI case now, because Ronette had stepped over the border. Whereas there's not really that conditional situation going on here. We don't know how much in advance the sheriff department were notified the FBI would be here, and on what grounds the FBI is here. Why are they taking this case? Like, to anyone on the outside, this should be settled by local authority. So I can kind of understand, even though it's not, obviously, again, the sheriff department are bad, but I can kind of understand them being a little standoffish because the FBI are rolling in here without really much of a precedent or much of a reason.
I mean, overall, they have taken interest in the case and they have contacted him beforehand. So it's not like this is the last second. Even like Cable ends up saying, like, they told me some J. Edgar Hoover was coming around, and I said,
that's where you got that
so
from.
So what? Yes.
I was wondering where you got J. Edgar Hoover from earlier.
Basically the same guy.
No.
So.
Anyway, Sheriff Cable TV. I was thinking about that when I was rewatching it this time, and I'm like, cable, obviously you think of like a steel cable, but then I'm also thinking of like cables, electricity, cable TV, and I'm like, yeah, it's too consistent to ignore.
It's too consistent to ignore. I think that there is some heavy like push that The law enforcement is in some darker dealings, and calling him Cable is a good parallel. Not to mention, like,
Anti-Andy later is shown to be in some dark dealings for sure.
Yeah, no, it
Bobby
is.
puts it into that.
If I could say anything about it, is that if I could imagine Black Lodge residents or what they would look like, or post-corruption what they would look like, I think that the law is definitely on their side.
So, in terms of decor, the sheriff office has a giant saw on the wall.
Yep.
Which, again, imagery. There's a picture of Sheriff Cable bending the steel. Very iconic.
Yes.
Now, granted, if I bend steel, I'd probably put it in my sheriff's office. I'm not really. That's fine.
If you bend steel, you would personally become a sheriff. Just put that in your office by the sound of it.
Honestly, yes. He has this sort of critical, insulting attitude toward Chet Desmond right away, referring to an actual FBI agent as little fella multiple times in conversation.
Yeah.
He says he doesn't want people sniffing into the neck of their woods, at which point Chet calls him a little fella back, kind of pushing immediately on that.
Yeah.
Chet Desmond says, your behavior isn't funny. It's wasting the time of the federal government. And then you get the excellent reply from Sheriff Cable, you're lucky I'm not wasting you. Which, I mean, you see what he did to that steel cable.
Yeah, you threatened the FBI agent on the clock. Yeah. All the witnesses nearby in the area.
And it has zero impact. Like, whether you call it like his strength of character or, again, the sleepy performance, I don't know what it is. But I get the sense when, like, you're looking at Chet Desmond, he is unfazed. It is zero damage to this man.
I enjoy, if I could describe this person's performance, Cable's performance, it's definitely vibration. And I do enjoy that. Just like being like, so hot, I'd hoist you.
Yeah. And at this point, Chet Desmond orders Sheriff Cable to release all the information on Teresa Banks. Cable says that, hey, we close at 5, you got to be quick.
Which, by the way, he doesn't really even look underneath his table too much. He just literally has everything that he needs. It's just right there and just shoves it to him.
It was already. This is all an act. It's all just a pretense. It's almost like someone, like a dog trying to bark louder and just try to show who's boss around here. But he knew it was going to eventually happen.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't even try to put up much of a fight. He's just all talk right at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole idea of we close at 5, you got to be quick. Well, it's like, well, no, duh, the FBI is going to work on their own schedule. Like, are you not going to let them into your own morgue? So it's just like, no, duh, you do not need to wait on. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a silly situation.
I think it's very much power moves going back and forth. It's just like saying, I'm sorry, but we're closing down. He's
trying to compensate for something. His steel beam may not. Insert the crude joke you want to insert here. I do think that he has one legitimately good joke, though, later on in the episode. Mm-hmm. When, this is after some events happen, they come back to the department. Some events.
Nothing important.
Nothing important. We'll get Chet Desmond, he says, what happened to Teresa Banks' ring? And Sheriff Cable says, we got a phone here. Got a little ring.
Which, by the way, if we remember, the use of the telephone pulse and the use of electricity and that little sound that
this
the
is where
arm
I'd make the whooping noise if it didn't sound so potentially problematic.
Yeah, no, it comes off in this early portion of the film like a ringing sound because it's going across the telephone poles.
A whooping.
The fact that he even says it has a little bit of a ring in response to the ring, again, makes Cable very suspicious.
He means it like it is, like how it sounds.
Like how it is, like how it sounds, but also I think there's a Black Lodge layer inside there.
Yeah,
I genuinely
that's what I mean. I think that's the level of analysis that hits that sweet spot where, yes, we are stretching it, but we're also looking at it in a very direct way.
Yes.
Like, when you say a ring, it does have two meanings. Mm-hmm. It has the physical wearing of a ring, but it also has the sound wave. Mm-hmm. And I think that both are being linked.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah, if I could say something about Deer Meadow is the aftermath of how bad things can really get when it comes down to this. The Dugpaws were very successful here.
The next major area is Hap's Diner. We have two characters of note here, I guess, along with the guy who mentions the dead girl, as well as the French-speaking woman. Are you okay there, sir?
I'm sorry. Were you speaking? Sorry, I was just saying if you're speaking there.
I don't understand your accent.
It
SpongeBob joke?
Yep.
Okay, good.
There's
callback.
Yeah. There is a heavy sort of atmosphere that hits you straight in the face once you're introduced to Haps, with a deep sound of like buzzing as they're trying to fix a weird light bulb in the back room of Haps Diner.
Electricity.
Yep. We're talking to Jack, was it?
Jack.
Yep, good old Jack. Say goodbye to Jack as he's making it a point towards our main characters.
Used to say hello. That got crossed out.
Yep, does not say hello. It seems like he is very much not into the introductions anymore. It's like, her name is Irene, and it is not. That is all you need to know when you go in here. Something along those lines, as he's just like saying, like, that's the name, it's night, just don't go any deeper.
Noticeably, the person who's nearby sitting is a bearded man.
Who's staring at the camera.
The light bulb is a reddish pink.
Yep.
Blue and red, they be colors
Of
note.
colors. And after, like, Chet Desmond as well as Sam Stanley do exit out, and when it seems like the light bulb has gone to the either fix point or screw it, we're not going to fix it point, they do follow out and walk out into a nearby booth when Sam Stanley and Chet Desmond. It's almost as if, like, there are eyes everywhere, if you will. Owls almost.
Blinking.
Well, I don't think owls... Do owls blink?
I was talking about the blinking eyes with like Lil, like the eyes of the authority. Okay, well, anyway, mixing our metaphors here.
Yes.
And then we meet the real star of Fire Walk with Me, Irene. This is a little ditty.
That is her name.
This is a little ditty about Jack and Irene, two American kids. How's that song go again?
I don't know. I've never heard the song.
Jack and Diane. This little ditty about Jack and Diane, two American kids in the heartland.
You know a song. As
Football
we've all known.
star. That's not how
This is
song
the rest
goes.
of the podcast.
Okay, Irene. She talks about Teresa having only worked there for a month.
Yep.
Nice girl.
Yeah, by the
Never
way-
got there on time.
Yeah, I find it hilarious. They're just like, don't go any further. They immediately go further, like without skipping a beat. And it looks like Irene's almost having almost none of it. It's just like, no, this stuff is plain and simple, kids. Or in the same sense of Jack, stop asking questions.
Because to her, it's not really a big deal. Like, this was just a drifter nobody cared about. Like, it's a typical murder situation.
Is it? I think that's what she's laying on thick. I don't know if that's necessarily the case that either she has convinced herself, but maybe it's just like a sense of like, again, don't ask questions. Especially with the law enforcement we have, don't ask questions seems to be
We're going to be
important.
so repetitive here, but the anti-Twin Peaks idea, the sole motivation of most of Twin Peaks' residents was the question and the search of who killed Laura Palmer. Everyone asking who killed Laura Palmer. Everyone wanting to have some sort of resolution with that.
It seems like they're
This is actively running away from it or hiding it.
They are basically speed running. Forget about Teresa Banks. Don't go into the mystery. Everything is done.
Yeah.
She's just been a drifter.
Now the show might have done that with Ronette.
Ronette's still alive, though.
Burn. Yeah,
Ronette
I
is
know,
a
I know,
living
I know,
person,
I know.
so we can ignore her.
Yeah, exactly.
Just push her into the hole in Twin Peaks.
Dang straight. Irene does suggest, however, that while Teresa was good and nice, she had a cocaine problem. Never saw her using, though. This is just kind of a suspicion.
Never saw her use it, never experienced it herself, which says a lot in the sense of like she's accepting it's cocaine despite the fact she might not know what that means.
No for sure proof. And then one more thing about Irene I thought was kind of funny is that Irene says, want to hear about our specials? We don't have any. I'm just imagining from a customer service standpoint, the idea of bringing up, specials. You want to hear about them? Too bad. It's such a ridiculous idea.
She almost, I wouldn't say she relishes in that sort of position. It's almost as if something had sparked a little bit more lightheartedness. After we had Sam Stanley spilled coffee on his crotch by Chet Desmond's little ploy, that's when she actually does come forward in a more lighter tone and even gives more information.
So maybe Chet Desmond wasn't just trying to prank Sam. He was actually using it as a tactic to get information out of Irene.
Yeah, and because
it was all for the investigation.
It could be. Like, she becomes a little bit more sympathetic after that because it seems like she was off on side, but she might have seen, like, these guys are harmless, or it's like, okay. I don't think that these guys are going to be as bad as they seem. So she gives in a little bit more information saying that at one time, like, while she's working there, a few days before her death, like, her left arm just stopped. Like, it stopped working. And guess what? What are two attributes to the left hand of Teresa Banks? What are two defining attributes?
like the phone, she has a little ring.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's very, very specific ring.
And then I know that later, I can't quite put my nail on it, but there's a bit of an alphabet happening underneath.
I mean, yes, there's that, but another attribute.
Oh, third.
I guess there is a third,
Okay.
because I wasn't talking about the dead body yet. I'm talking about in the moment of being inside of there. One thing is that it seems that she's either left-hand dominant or she focuses smoking with her left hand. So having her vice, her drug, be in that hand, the one that we can confirm she does use, like cocaine's not confirmed, this is.
Okay.
Both are upon her left hand. And having that go out, if you will, around a point that she might have had different plans than the lodge really liked. All I'm saying is that, that's rough, buddy. That is rough.
Sure. Speaking of that's rough, buddy, Carl Rod having a rough morning at the Fat Trout Trailer Park. He's played by Harry Dean Stanton.
Which, again, I'm just going to keep complimenting roles. This was a fun movie, guys. I had a fun time.
Yeah, having a lighthearted, good old fun time.
Yeah, with the most miserable man I've ever seen.
So,
it's excellent time.
Harry Dean Stanton was a recurring Lynch actor, was in a lot of his movies before passing away, and rather recently. He had a sign on his door in the movie.
Multiple signs.
Do not disturb. Do not ever disturb before 9 a.m. Ever.
That was his sign specifically. But there's a whole bunch of notes on this thing. It's like, please fix this. Please do this. I need to do this rent.
Yep.
Basically, everything's piling up, and it doesn't really seem he really cares. As soon as he opens the door, he is just straight up inside of his bathrobe. He's got a bandage on his head, which is bleeding for some reason. It seems like already... I know it's before 9 a.m., but still, he's having no...
Well, if we were trying to do like a parallel inversion thing, the closest thing we'd have to this is Ben Horn, because he runs the inn, right? Which is not the same thing as a trailer park, but it's the closest thing we have.
I mean, I would argue another one. Someone who shuts himself away, does not want to be bothered, but for obvious other reasons. I mean, Harold Smith. Harold Smith is someone who shuts himself away and wants not to deal with anyone else for one reason or another, because the outside world is a hindrance to him for, again, one reason or another.
In the words of Frollo from Hunchback Notre Dame, the world is cruel, the world is ugly.
I agree. Anyway.
One of many points I agree with Claude Frollo.
So,
just kidding.
Hellfire.
Genocide's bad.
Hellfire.
Infanticide's bad.
But yes.
Water's good.
But no, he answers it. He's pretty much upset, and there's even this very much jumpiness we didn't notice from our two ace individuals, Chet Desmond and Sam Stanley, being okay, we're on their toes.
I thought
now.
at first you said the ace asexual. I'm like, wait, what? You know some lore about them I don't know. Gotcha.
ACE.
Not the other. Okay, we're good.
I mean, I don't know.
I was just saying Jimmy. I didn't know that information. You have access to their trading card information. I don't, I guess.
I do have the Twin Peaks trading cards. I don't know if they're inside there.
Okay.
Anyway,
Continue.
there is a point in which, as soon as they're saying oh, we need to check out Teresa Banks' trailer and so on, and as he reaches around in this very offish, they almost twitch, and it's almost as if they're getting ready to defend themselves.
Well, at the door, it's to do not serve before 9 a.m. ever. They're like, oh crap, we just knocked. We need to be ready.
Yeah, but they when he's reaching around the corner and they twitch out, just they're almost reaching for something. This man doesn't seem too much like a danger, but maybe they're sensing something I do not.
It's the instability of the situation, and also he's someone closer to the mystery itself. It isn't interesting that you note that, yeah, because Carl Rod, the character seems mostly tired, more than any other emotion I would put on him.
Yep.
He's got a Band-Aid on his forehead.
Yeah, he's got a bandage, which is red too, so that means that's a fresh wound.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because head damage has some history in Twin Peaks.
Yeah,
but I don't take it as that dark in this situation.
Nope. Who knows what is the secret life behind this man? We do know that the bandage does disappear eventually, though. But as far as this day goes, he's not having a good day in the first place. So that's probably even just hurts his mood even more.
Well, yeah, ever since Teresa Banks died, her trailer park has become... Apparently her trailer house has become very popular which makes you wonder who's all been coming and going from this area.
Now, the thing is that how popular is popular to this man who doesn't want to be disturbed? Like, is it just like, oh, they're so popular, but it's like the weekend. It just like had 3 visits. It's like, oh, this is too much. Or is it a situation where, no, yeah, legitimately, people are looking into it and probably moving things around?
Mm-hmm. My favorite moment with this character is definitely the one I find the most open-ended and strange, is where he encounters this lady with an ice pack.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of darkened face that she has, almost like she's been around like a coal mine or something. Ice pack on one eye, carrying a cane. When she's asked, if she knows Teresa Banks, she doesn't even say anything. She just walks away. Well, at the moment this happens, Carl Rod just kind of stares in the direction where she'd been, and you could just tell he's like frozen.
He is certainly frozen, and it seems like there's a sense of haunting with him. Not only this lady, if I could like describe, she kind of almost looks bluish, as if like she herself has been wrapped up recently. Again, like it does not seem like there's happy things going on here. It doesn't feel like people are being treated well. It feels like everything's being put on the side, whether it's law enforcement, home investment. This place is heavily neglected, and to have someone be shaky and not know where to trust, and even the person who should be responsible for the well-being of the people, or at the very least just make sure to see what's going on, kind of being very passive, is certainly something. And he even has some pretty strong coffee, too. That's my personal favorite moment to take away, when he brings around Good Morning America coffee for them, for both Chet Desmond as well as Sam Stanley, to kind of get them prepped up for the investigation. You'd think he'd be more lively, but no, it seems like, again, he just needed like some coffee just for himself, just to get by. I also enjoy the fact that when coffee is being brought over, Chet Desmond, he's like, you see Sam Stanley like nervously like looking around, like looking through all the details, and just like noticing different things like the picture of Teresa Banks and so on. Meanwhile, Chet Desmond, he just kind of like picks up like a pencil and just plays with the eraser head on a little notepad. I don't know if that has anything to do with the eraser head or anything. I haven't seen it.
Yes, it has everything to do with it.
Everything.
I will not explain what I mean.
This is a parallel.
I will not explain what I mean.
And that's probably why that lady was haunted as well.
Yeah, and along with that kind of frozen look Carl Rod gives, there's a moment where he just sort of almost, I sense a tone of fear in his voice. He says, see, I've already gone places. I just want to stay where I am.
Yeah, and he does mention later on, like, having bad dreams and so on.
And it's like, when he says he's gone places, does he mean, like... Because, like, there's 2 ways my brain is going. One is that he's been to prison. He doesn't want to go back to prison. He doesn't want anything to land on him that's going to put him back in prison or in a bad place.
Maybe there was a version of Carl Rod in which was more so helpful and more so cheery, but dealing with the police in this area, especially like trying to catch on, he just doesn't want to deal with it. He knows what they'll do.
Yeah.
And so being in those places... He's just saying, this is all I've got. I'm staying here. I'm staying out of everyone's business.
The other interpretation I have, though, is someone who's been to places. I think of another new character at Philadelphia named Philip Jeffries, who has been to one of the meetings.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me feel like, okay, well, Carl Rod, he says, I've gone places. I just want to stay where I am. Considering that you live around the Teresa Banks area, around where the Chalfonts were living.
And having bad dreams.
Having bad dreams where the electricity is whooping. I don't know if the places you've been are physical. Like, I don't know if you've been in only one plane of existence recently.
Like, poor Carl, if it's both situations.
So I like the ambiguity there. I like that it lets you kind of think both ways. And even, no matter which way you take it, it has a similar meaning, weirdly enough. If he's been to the Nightmare Black Lodge places, or he's been to prison in Deer Meadows, either way... He wants to just stay put and be in someplace happier for once.
Yeah, no, and
stability.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just some definitely weird things going on and some very creepy elements going on. Even just across from Teresa Banks's like little trailer, there is an orange chair specifically set far back enough that it's not looking at the traffic passing by, but just at her trailer.
Yeah.
How much was Carl Rod even aware of this going on? How much like... Are we even going to be dealing with situations that are elsewise inside this trailer park area, including the deputy whose trailer is pointed out multiple times by him? It is, it's something, isn't it?
I almost get the impression that Carl Rod is someone who isn't really trying to hurt the investigation, but I feel like he'd have very little to actually communicate because he tries to avoid knowing things.
Yep.
Like, when he makes that comment about the Chalfonts where he's like, well... It's almost like now that he's thought of it. Like, it's like, oh, yeah, I mean, the Chalfonts, There used to be a Chalfont before them. And it's like he's just kind of figuring that out now. Like, he's so uninvolved in his tenants' lives, he doesn't even ask them, hey, are you related to the last Chalfonts? I feel like he just wants to have nothing to do with it. Keep me out of their business.
Or, again, mythical nature thing. Maybe there's just sort of after effect that people, like, kind of overlook those details because there's some more mythical energy.
There's something else that distracted him outside the name.
Everything's just not as it seems.
Since you're so fixated on drugs, I would assume that you would have an opinion on Hot Water Lady.
I feel sorry. Again, it's an example on Carl Rod's association on how he's going to deal with some issues, I think. Like, sure, he could just be, like, caring and wanting to help out this lady, but I think the most opportune angle, as this lady is like, hot water, Carl, hot water, as he's trying to lead Chet Desmond down the road, pointing out the different spots so we know he's going to a new area. Again, I think that's great directing. But he just kind of, like, brings her off to the side. It's like, no, we're just going to get you some, what was the drug
Valium.
again? Valium. Let's get you some Valium. And
Which,
just like,
it's used to treat anxiety, but also muscle spasms and disorders.
yes.
So with the way she's walking, the Valium could be something legitimately she's supposed to be taking to help her legs.
But still, he still doesn't, like, address the core issue that she's having at the moment, and that is, again, hot water, which I find to be very important as someone who keeps losing hot water. So...
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry for us.
I'm sorry for us, too. You know who else I'm sorry for?
Who?
Teresa Banks.
Teresa.
Don't laugh. This is serious.
I know.
Why is this so funny to you, Professor?
I feel sorry for the dead girl, yes. I mean, yes, it should be an obvious point, but it's so, like, blatant, like, yes, we should feel sorry for her.
How old is Teresa Banks?
Apparently old enough to hang around Laura Palmer, but also probably left home.
Is she an adult?
I don't recall.
I'll go baby down. No, I found something.
So I was doing some click-clack mooing here, and I stumbled on the Twin Peaks wiki, and I was looking at the information of, like, hey, when is Teresa Banks born? And the source for this is the autobiography of FBI agent Special Agent Dale Cooper,
Which we'll
My
get
Life,
to.
My Tapes.
We'll get to it.
Which is by Scott Frost. And this book is dubious in terms of canonicity. It's canon if you want it to be. I don't know how much information is in it, like, gets contradicted anywhere else, because we haven't read it yet.
We haven't read it yet, but there's already contradictory information with Jennifer Lynch's, so
yeah.
I have a feeling that I'm going to believe it's canon no matter how much I got twisted.
There we go. So when Dale Cooper, like, punches babies in Walmarts, they'll be like, well, that's true.
Wow, this was a wild chapter.
Anyway, so according to that, Teresa Banks was born in 1970, which would put her at being in her very, very late 20s, almost 30, by the time of this. Which feels way older than I would have expected.
Wasn't it like 1989?
Yeah.
No,
Wait.
late 20s? You're doing math wrong.
I'm doing math wrong. Hold on.
So she aged faster than expected.
So that means she's like 19.
Yeah.
I know math.
So what was the year she was born?
1970.
When was she dead?
She was a dead person in 1988.
Okay, so she's about 18.
So she was a legal adult at the time of her death.
Yeah. It's good to die
This
at
literally
legal
was
age.
just me wondering if she's a girl or a woman. And that specificity of language. I mean, I'm glad I went down this rabbit hole, but I'm really sad that Teresa Banks went through the rabbit hole of death.
I too am sad that someone died. I agree with that sentiment. I don't want people to die.
That's a hard take right there.
But yeah, no, she's about 18 years old.
So Teresa Banks, 18 years old, lived at, I almost wonder if she's not from the area, right? Like, she's a drifter. She moved in probably. I'm going to assume here that wherever she came from, her hometown, her family, whatever, she was leaving those situations. And Deer Meadow doesn't seem to be a place you go for new opportunities.
No, it seems
Not
like it's
good
there
ones.
for cheap rent.
Yeah, not good ones. You go there for cheap rent and seedy environments. It's kind of a bad place to be. So she was living at Fat Trout Trailer Park, and she was at Hap's Diner for about a month.
Yes.
And she worked the night shift. We know that. And when she died, no one came to claim the body. So it's supposed that she has no next of kin, no family who even knows she was here.
Yeah. Which is sad because if no one's claiming the body, that is a very small morgue. We gotta get ready for the other dead people coming in.
Anyway, so they take the body out of the morgue and they do the autopsy. During said autopsy, we have witness to Sam Stanley's abilities, which he seems good. Seems good at doing the autopsy thing.
Yeah.
I'm not really much of a connoisseur of flesh cutting, but
Okay, Hannibal.
he seemed to do a pretty good job. Also, speaking of cutting, the camera was cutting to interesting angles. Unlike Laura Palmer, whose like death has almost a serenity to it, like in Death, Laura Palmer seemed the most at peace. Teresa Banks' mouth is like open, like at a weird jarring angle. Her eyes are wide open. Like there's nothing calm about the image of Teresa Banks dead.
Yeah, no, she's even breathing.
I know what you're talking about because I remember you bringing this up when we first tried to record this podcast, but let me pretend. Breathing? What do you mean, Professor?
You see her chest rise up and down at certain angles, and it's just a funny moment. She's doing an excellent job with the dead body shtick. I think that she's doing great.
Dead body shtick.
Yes, I think that she's doing great inside of her role and performance. It's just one of those like unfortunate cuts that it's just like, yeah, no, the chest is rising up and down. I'm not asking for your actors to just hold their breath for long ranges of dialogue. I'm okay with that.
I'm asking for that.
But Teresa Banks lives on one way or another in the zombie form.
Well, actually, everything David Lynch does is for a purpose, so we're led to believe that that was for a reason.
Teresa Banks lives on.
Teresa Banks is breathing, and that means that she is, in fact, not dead.
Thank you, Kermit the Frog. So...
That's not really. I was really going for Kermit, but
well, I don't know what to say about that. I'm sorry, you're Kermit now.
Okay,
You're Kermit.
Oh, okay. That's how Kermit talks either.
Hey,
That's Kermit.
I'm Kermit the Frog.
Miss Piggy. No, that's Mickey Mouse.
Oh, Miss Piggy.
Oh, Miss Piggy.
We on Fox now. Come along. Woo.
Anyway, so Teresa Banks' skull was crushed.
This isn't funny. We
Stop laughing, Professor. It was caused by repeatedly being hit there with a blunt object. We find out later the blunt object's like a handle of like a hammer.
Yes.
And, her personal objects included a watch, waitress uniform, and undergarments. But on her finger, there was like clearly a circular mark where a ring would have been that was a different shade than the rest of the body that had been kind of discolored.
Yes.
Also under the ring finger was the letter T, which connects to the overarching idea of the letters being spelled out, we learn about in the main series, of Robert, or potentially Robert's son, whatever you think that Bob was trying to spell out.
Yes.
Which, side note, that would imply that like Bob killed 3 people, but was clearly intending to like do more.
Yeah.
Because Robert would mean at least 3 more deaths. Robert's son would be like 6 more deaths.
I think that if it wasn't for Dale Cooper being so close towards the end, as well as things around Dale Cooper with good old Wyndham Earl, maybe the game would have gone on for longer. But I think that Dale Cooper became such an important piece that we kind of sped things along.
Well, it also makes me wonder, why would Bob want to put letters in the fingers? Is it even a rational thing, or is it just like a game? Like, who knows with Bob? Who knows with Bob? Am I right, ladies?
Well, if you had to hide a letter, if you just like taped it on, it wouldn't stay. So putting it on the ring finger.
Also, I really, really do enjoy enjoy sounds like it's a positive thing. It's viscerally disgusting, but the effect with the nail that's done in the movie. Like, it's already a little squeamish in the TV show when he does the stuff with the finger.
Yep.
But this one, they freaking rip off the nail.
Crack.
I find it to be very effective.
No, it is very effective.
And it's one of those things where a lot of special effects from the 90s don't age particularly well. This is a practical effect that still holds up extremely well. Also because there's not a lot of competition for seeing films that involve nails being ripped up better. It's not a common thing you see in movies to be
not
one-upped.
usually a competition.
Yeah. You know what else was not a competition?
A lot of things, but what?
Leland killing this girl, this woman.
I mean, I'm sure that Bob might consider it a competition in some ways.
So we get some moments later on with Leland's character where he like flashes back to stuff involving Teresa Banks.
Yeah.
It's interesting then that we really don't ever see Teresa Banks from Teresa Banks' point of view.
No.
With Laura Palmer and the rest of the movie, which again, we're only talking about like half an hour of the movie right now. The Laura Palmer section of the movie, it's not from her perspective necessarily, but we're so closely and intimately tied to her perspective that I feel like we're getting a really well-rounded idea of Laura's life day in and day out.
Yeah.
Teresa Banks, we only catch little rumors from all these different people who don't probably know the real Teresa Banks.
I think that we still get enough of a picture on what was really going on with Teresa Banks. I mean, as far as we know, she is someone who is living on her own, like either she moved out early or she moved out as soon as she could when she hit adulthood, went straight into Deer Meadow because there is likely an easy means of rent. It was an easy access place, but still she needed to get by, which makes money a major motivator. So she ends up seeing someone like Leland Palmer over a course of time because Leland Palmer is giving her a fair amount of money, if you will, to constantly sleep with her.
And one of the concerns about that, of course, is that in terms of motivation, why he's choosing her to sleep with, why he would go and do this. One, out of Twin Peaks, it kind of keeps it a little more off the radar that he's not doing it in his local area. But also, there's a moment where he's looking at her picture and he says, "You look just like my Laura."
And in fact, no, he actually ends up saying this like as they're in bed with one another. Like he is just making comments about Laura Palmer as they are sleeping with one another. And even makes a point, like he made that slip up.
Yeah.
He made it clear, like, he reminded me of my Laura. And as he's just, like, kissing and lusting over her, he ends up, like, quickly putting his hand over her eyes and just says, "Who am I? I don't know." Keeping the sense of what should have been anonymity very strong. And another point that was led on stronger, because he wanted to be with the girls she's always talking about. Well, that's got set up, friends. Yeah. And he saw Laura Palmer in very compromising attire for her age. Yeah. And that is when he quickly cowered and quickly got out of the situation because there's no happy ending to that. Pays off Teresa Banks, which probably even led her more on the trail that, hey,
there's something off here.
Daddy Big Bucks.
Because, Leland originally was going to sleep with Teresa and the girlfriends you told me about, not realizing that'd be Laura and Ronette. And when he runs off, it's the biggest clue you could ever get that, wait, there's something going on here. And at that point, it's almost like too late for Teresa Banks because she knows too much. She knows too much for Leland to let that go.
Oh, no, that wasn't even like the Lynch point, I think. I think that
Lynch point.
I think that the most important part was the small bits of dialogue we got with Ronette and Jacques Renault inside of the club, in which Ronette said that, she was going to blackmail a guy. And that is when Jacques said, she was asking about your dad's. In almost like a pass-off line. But no, that's very important if Teresa Banks is asking about like the names of fathers just to confirm her suspicions. Apparently, from what we gather from that information, she was blackmailing Leland Palmer then, and she was going to be going off somewhere. She likely was trying to get out of her horrible situation and try to find a new life for herself because she's in Deer Meadow. And if you are threatening someone with Bob on the inside, not to mention trying to get away from this Black Lodge lifestyle that she has married herself to, well, the divorce is going to be a little messy. And so, after that has been all settled, he goes off, and, well, Leland Palmer, that is, and forces that divorce. We could even just tie that, since she is trying so hard to get out of her lifestyle, that's why her left hand went numb. She's trying to get away from her vices, and she's trying to get away from all this, so the hand that's associated with them is no longer connecting with her. It's no longer hers, if you will. Like, that's no longer what she is, what she wants. And
I mean, one-armed man, he saw the face of God and cut his arm off.
Yeah, you could say that she had a similar situation, except, again, if it weren't for the fact that everything was happening with things like Bob and Bob's own personal plan, whether he put it into motion around then and decided then or not, it got messy for her. And so that's when Leland struck.
There's so much you can kind of grapple on with after what you said. I think it raised a lot of interesting points. You know, we like to be pretty exhaustive in this podcast. Like, we could definitely like skim over a lot of these smaller details and have less talking points, but we like to go through everything. And I think that that's generally a good approach. But even within our rather exhaustive format, there's still so many avenues you could explore with this that I think would be very interesting if anyone wants to have those kind of explorations. Like, the fact that Teresa Banks was able to survive as well as she was only by being exploited by very shady, questionable men. That basically her means of power and economy were to use her body to basically play a power game with these men. She would allow them to have their way with her, which allows her to receive payment to live. And the only way in which she saw to escape from this kind of cyclical life she was living, working a full-time job plus this on the side, was to ultimately usurp that power in the form of the blackmail. To, take what, I'm assuming for her, she was someone who was allowing these men to live out their darker fantasies by using the idea of blackmail. She would turn that sort of fantasy on its head and turn into a nightmare scenario for him by revealing the secret. Had it not been Leland, had it not been this circumstance, it might have worked. But if you take away like all of the spiritual angles and the Twin Peaks angles, this is ultimately a very tragically realistic portrayal of someone who is involved in sex work at a young age, kind of almost out of the sense of necessity, wants to leave that lifestyle, does so in a very desperate and risky way, because that's the only way she really sees out of the situation, and ends up being killed for it, and no one cares because they just view her as a drifter who was on cocaine. But they don't know that.
Yeah, as opposed towards Laura Palmer, who was this very big figure inside the town, someone who involved herself in all sorts of things. I think that it is very notable, and why I do like these parallels in the storytelling. We don't get Teresa Banks' perspective because Teresa Banks basically didn't exist for the world. Teresa Banks was a side note in other people's stories because that is how she was treated for this whole time. Meanwhile,
and just
Laura
how
Palmer,
much the girls that everyone thinks are pure, they're the ones worth mourning. I think there's a sort of ironic darkness to that both of them died around a similar age. Both of them experienced a lot of darkness through their lens of their lives. Both of them led their own lives of tragedy, but the one who's going to be fixated on is the one that this town thought was their homecoming queen and who they're going to tell stories about. What about the girls who don't get the stories? What about the people who, the dropouts, the runaways, the people who work the night shift that no one ever sees? I think that story is worth telling, and I like that it's even told here, even in an abridged form.
In abridged form, there are breadcrumbs across the film that when you just put it back together, it is very nice in my eyes. Not for the content, but more so how you can gather the story together. Again, good choices here, intentional or not.
One last thing about this whole Teresa Banks Leland situation I want to highlight before we jump to Philadelphia is that we have a weird scenario as Leland is leaving from the situation where he saw Laura through the window and Ronette through the window. He's leaving. We see, we're just going to call the jumping man. We see him emerge as Leland walks away. And from the way it's shot, it's unclear if Leland sees the jumping man or not. It's unclear if Teresa sees the jumping man or not. We as the viewer certainly do.
Which, to also note onto that, it appears to be the Tremon boy inside of the overall mask, long nose. Black Dog Runs at Night, which, by the way, there's just some fun lyrics thrown into a very deep tone that apparently David Lynch handled a lot of the music inside of this.
The writing, yes.
Yes.
And then Angelo Badalamenti did a lot of the vocals.
No, a Black Dog Runs at Night. You see him just sort of leaping around, running inside of a circle, almost like quote-unquote chasing his own tail.
Yeah.
What do you take from that?
I mean, the most literal, obvious interpretation I could think of is to look at the mask and the long nose. Long nose, Pinocchio.
Yep.
It's the most obvious thing with a long nose. Is it the only thing? No. But it's the most obvious. And then the idea of a mask, I mean, the symbolism of a mask is pretty straightforward. This is someone who is wearing a white mask of purity that is lying about said purity and is in a panic.
Yep.
And the jumping could be kind of two different emotions. You could read into it frustration and anxiety, but you could also read it's like almost giddy and lively. And I think that duality plays off of Bob.
I think that I don't...
Pain and pleasure are both his children.
I think he got me until the point of the giddy means the jumping. The way that I imagine a giddy and a jump would take larger strides, if you will. From this one, it looks like he's crouching over and he's making leaps around. The motion of it reminds me of literally leaping over hurdles, in which Leland Palmer himself is probably going to try to leap around hurdles, but in the end, he's just going to run around in circles. Like, there's only one result that's going to come out of this.
Yeah. And I think less of it trying to implicate the idea that the jumping man is Bob or is Leland. I don't think it's anything that direct. It almost reminds me more of like, this is a chorus from like a play. Like this is a figure outside the fiction commenting on it almost, or like mimicking it.
Yeah.
It feels like a third party, which is why if Leland isn't seeing it and Teresa isn't seeing it, it would make sense for us to see it. It's almost like a little bit of commentary happening.
The Dugpas are jesters. They are basically the people on the outside end, if not mocking towards the tone, just making jest or making light of the situation.
And I think of the magician between two worlds, between the world of the fiction and the world of the people watching the fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of everything we just got done talking about, Philadelphia.
Born and raised.
Do you like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
I remember enjoying it, but I haven't seen it in decades. I know that they got back together for a reunion on HBO Max, but I don't have as close of an association. I'm sure I'd be thoroughly entertained if I went back in, but I don't know how much of that would be nostalgia.
If you
As
had to
any
replace any one character from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with a cyborg, which character would you replace with a cyborg?
Why a cyborg?
I don't know, just thought it'd be a funny question.
If I could replace someone with a cyborg, it would probably be Will Smith's character directly, just because there has to be antics that sort of he gets into in order to sort of move an idea or a plot along, or just move a lesson along that would likely have to be associated with such things as his uncle, Uncle Phil, was it?
Yes.
So having something that doesn't really like know how to human, perhaps, just trying to force conflict, I think would be very humorous.
I want it to be DJ Jazzy Jeff. I will not substantiate my reasoning. Speaking of substantiating things, on the wall of the office of the Philadelphia of the United States is a Dwight D. Eisenhower portrait on the wall, the cracked Liberty Bell.
Which, by the way,
many presidential and American decorums.
I think that it's very humorous seeing something such as a Liberty Bell as the first shot before introducing us to the general offices, mainly because it's a very fascinating thing of why there's even a crack on the bell. It literally is that they struck it too hard, and the material on it just didn't really quite work out so well.
I think it's just, like the most obvious thing to me is it's just setting up, hey, we're in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Like it's just like context of like, yep.
Yep.
In case you didn't read the word at the bottom of the screen, now you know for sure.
It is.
But you could also linger on the image of the bell.
Yeah. I think that the offices are also very fascinating because not only the office in Philadelphia, but also Gordon Cole in his office in Oregon.
Oregon, yep.
Yep. Where we see things such as like a picture of an American flag and just an actual American flag on the opposite ends of the room.
That's how you know you're a true patriot.
You see there's light coming into the room that's natural, but there's also a whole bunch of lamps on. Gordon Cole is very bad with resource management. There is just some funky things going on with the office, and that has not changed in their Philadelphia office either.
I remember you went through a extreme rabbit hole with me last time we tried to do this podcast, where you were fixated on this painting that was on the wall.
Yes.
Of like the different founding fathers, and like George Washington was there. And
yes.
I don't know what to say about that. I just wanted to acknowledge that it happened.
When you deal with like background elements that have been wild, like in this movie, and you see a very specific painting, you gotta know what it is. It may be a red herring, I may be a Sam Stanley, but I need to know.
And whenever we have those sort of itches to scratch, I find that the Twin Peaks blog, which is aptly titled twinpeaksblog.com, is very effective for that.
Twin Peaks fans, you never disappoint. You don't, because you help me out so much, so I can actually sleep at night, so thank you.
But it's 10:10 a.m. right now, so we're not sleeping. It's 10:10 a.m., February 16th, and Cooper strides into Gordon Cole's office.
And he like gets up, nestled inside there, like a little kid, like nestled up against the little desk, and it's just like looking up to Gordon Cole. And the thing that throws me off so much in this movie is Cooper speaks normally to Gordon Cole. Everyone else seems to try to get his attention by speaking loudly, and that still is consistent throughout, except not Cooper.
And this might be a clue now that I'm thinking about it more. We'll get to my thoughts in a moment.
It's a Clooper. But yeah, he just like talks to Gordon Cole, and he's just like trying to communicate with him. I don't know if it's successful because he only responds once to speaking later on from Cooper, but he just kind of like gives a quizzical look, and he's just reminding Gordon Cole about the dream that he had, like how he's like connecting this.
And the sort of whispery, cautious tone implies that this dream might be in some way foreboding, or at the very least, extremely important to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this sort of hushed tone. Cooper is able to communicate through that. He is seen then going to the security camera, standing there for a while, staring at the camera.
Next to the security guard, who's just probably just trying to do his job.
Having a normal day. He goes into the other room and he checks the camera, like in the camera monitoring area.
Yep.
Does that security guard or anyone else like acknowledge Cooper?
Like he does look over. He's just like,
does.
yep, he does like kind of look over it, but just kind of gets back to his work.
So it's plausible deniability that he could just be like looking over. My point I'm trying to get at is, what if Cooper's not there? Like, if Cooper's not there, would this still make sense?
We do know that he talks to Albert Rosenfeld later, but there's certainly...
That's a separate situation.
That is a separate situation.
That might not be the same day.
Gordon Cole does recognize him. He does actually mention that this is Dale Cooper. So Gordon Cole sees him.
Gordon Cole seeing him is actually part of my point. So does anyone else see him, though, for sure? The person who looks over their shoulder, they could just, like, feel a breeze or hear a whisper and, like, kind of, like, look over something's weird, a little off.
Off of memory at the moment, I remember Albert Rosenfeld looks in the general direction, but at the same time, there's also Jeffries, who is just making sure to make a point of Cooper right there.
That's also part of where I'm going with this thought right now. So when he's going through, looking at the camera and looking between, the thing it immediately reminds me of is the situation in the Red Room at the end of Twin Peaks, which most people watching this movie would have seen the last episode of Twin Peaks. Mm-hmm. Going between rooms, looking at the camera, looking around, it reminds me of going between the Red Room looking for the doppelganger, or the doppelganger looking for Cooper, whichever way you want to spin it. All the coming and going back and forth. And it's really, really hard for me to separate that. And I think it's too direct to even try to separate it because of one piece of evidence. When Cooper comes into the room to talk to Gordon, do you know the song that plays?
What song?
It's The Dance of the Dream Man, the song from The Man from That Place. It's a Red Room song. It's a very specifically Red Room song. Like, it's not normally played outside of things be happening with the Red Room. So the fact that he enters with the Red Room, because it's not like the Twin Peaks main theme or like Laura Palmer's theme. Like, there's a lot of songs from Twin Peaks they could have Cooper enter with. They chose the one that's most clearly identified with the Red Room.
If you walked in with Laura Palmer's theme, does that mean he's Laura Palmer?
You know what I mean. Is that they chose very specifically, I mean Lynch primarily, chose a song that associates it with a dream. Then you have Jeffries coming in later, pointing at Cooper, you know, who do you think this is?
After, like, witnessing his own doppelganger in the camera, because going back and forth between the camera, he sees nothing, he sees nothing, he sees nothing. And then when Jeffries comes into the picture, that's when he stands before himself in the camera.
And Cooper's, like, frozen on this frame when Philip Jeffries walks down the hallway.
You could almost say his eyes are a little darker, too.
Yes.
That might just be a trick of the camera, but overall, it definitely makes things a little bit...
So the reason why I'm asking, is Cooper even there? And this might seem like a stretch, but I think there's a logic to it. I think that would explain how Gordon Cole hears him. That Gordon Cole isn't hearing Cooper as a person talking. He's hearing it in the way that is a dream or a spirit, almost like an intuition.
You could almost say that since there's so many things tied to dreams and so on, in things like the Black Lodge's case, as well as electricity is tied to the case, remember how Gordon Cole hears. Like, it doesn't seem like it's fully a condition. Yeah. He hears through electricity. He hears through his little ear pad, which the only exception ever was Shelley Johnson.
And the fact that Gordon Cole reacted so dramatically, it's not like Gordon Cole was like, oh, my socks are on fire. Cooper, someone else I can understand other than at one time you whispered in my office and I understood you perfectly. Someone else. Like, no, clearly this was the first time this ever happened to the guy. So that would, to me, again, imply that when he heard Cooper whisper, it wasn't an accident. Like, it's too direct, especially like you said, every other time in the movie, people are communicating with Gordon by yelling.
Yeah, they're yelling throughout that whole entire... They're trying to yell at this man in order to try to, like, communicate their points.
And even the way that Gordon, like, looks at Cooper, you could tell there's something strange about the way he kind of, like, leans in and looks at him.
He still, like, communicates like that is Special Agent Dale Cooper.
Yeah.
When, like, pressed by Jeffries, but it also brings up the point with Jeffries, whether it is this solution or not, or resolution or result.
And that's why Jeffries seeing him, I don't think, discounts this idea.
Like, do you know who this is?
Yeah.
Just like him trying to point out, because Cooper is different. Cooper is special, but in what ways at this moment? Maybe it's because like there is a weird timeline going on.
And we
with
see
Cooper.
that also with Cooper appearing with Annie and with Laura later on. So suffice to say for now, because this is going to get brought up, I think, as we continue further on, have I at least planted the seed for the possibility Cooper may not be physically there?
You have certainly planted a seed. I don't know what it's going to grow into.
Okay, fair enough. Philip Jeffries is indeed the waterer of this plant then. He's played by David Bowie,
Yep.
who is mainly known for music, but Bowie had an acting career prior and would continue to have an acting career.
Yes.
He is someone who dabbled in film quite consistently, and it goes beyond like a cameo. Like he would take on roles that very distinctly he wanted to do that role and be a character. Like he was Tesla in The Prestige. So what did you think of David Bowie as Philip Jeffries?
I think that Philip Jeffries was just another fun performance of someone who is just incredibly wild and manic, who is trying to communicate something desperately, but something is holding him back. I think that there is I can see people like taking this role and having something very memorable from this movie. I think "Hell God Baby Damn No" is going to stick inside my head
It's a
for
great
quite some
quote.
time.
It's a great quote.
It's one I can get right, which is also a plus.
I have pretty mixed feelings about Jeffries. You know, it leaves kind of the question in my mind, like, we get Jeffries on screen for like maybe 5 minutes. There might be more in the missing pieces, but at least as the film stands, like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And if we would have gotten another movie, because like some people believe, and I don't know if it's ever been officially confirmed by Lynch, that if this movie had done well enough, there would have been more movies.
Okay.
Let's say there would have been more movies. Do you expect that Jeffries or Chet Desmond would have come back and been, if not explained, contextualized more what happened to them?
I think that if we were to go back into it, that it would probably focus more so on general mystical elements, and I think that some mysteries they might dabble in more. For example, Judy is brought up inside of this.
Yes.
Now, you remember my theories overall with the Black Lodge and so on, how there is like attachments to certain things that people can't quite get over. And the most noble thing with Jeffries is that he says directly that we're just not going to talk about Judy. We're going to avoid that subject entirely. So that's sort of like very blatant, like put this aside for now.
Do you think that would have been continued in another movie?
The fact that we nearly end the movie on this figure that if we can assume to be Jeffries calling out for Judy, I think that if it's not going to answer, it's going to lay breadcrumbs. Very similar to how we see breadcrumbs for
You're
Teresa
saying
Banks.
end the movie. What are you referring to? Because the end of the scene is Laura and Cooper. What are you referring to?
Towards the end, there is a moment where we see a monkey-like face.
Okay, the monkey situation.
The monkey situation, which I don't think is supposed to be monkey. I think is just supposed to, with the added sense of darkness, it's supposed to be like come off as a disfigured face. But again, they used a monkey for it.
Okay. Okay, so the monkey, they made a monkey out of Jeffries.
Yes,
is the idea.
and he calls out for Judy.
Okay.
Like, and it's a very cautious sort of form, and we can assume that's the Black
I mean,
Lodge.
the voice certainly sounds like Jeffries.
Yeah. And we see the black, like, we've only seen this monkey inside the Black Lodge before, so to assume that that's heavily connected, that thing left behind, I think we'd cover it a little bit more.
So
I don't know about Chet Desmond, though.
Right.
I don't know if Chet Desmond would have appeared at all. But I think, like, the concept of Judy and whatever was left behind by Philip Jeffries, I can see us looking a little bit deeper into that.
And what I can say without spoiling anything here, one way or the other, is that
Judy Garland?
because there's no movie after this, right? There's no movie after this. There was Mark Frost's book, The Secret History of Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
There was The Return and then The Final Dossier. Those all didn't happen until like 2017.
So you're saying that the timeline won't change for me.
My saying is that in about 15 years, you can expect there to probably not be any more context on Philip Jeffries, Judy, etc., because nothing else was made after Fire Walk With Me for like 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard then to judge something like Philip Jeffries when this might have been intended to be set up for a movie that never happened. You know, we can see what they do or don't do with that later, if they do anything, but as it stands in the movie, it feels kind of random. Like it doesn't, quote unquote, go anywhere. So I have really mixed feelings on Jeffries because I like the sense of mystery. I like Bowie a lot. I just feel like Bowie was underutilized. I remember I remember thinking when I was watching it, again, controversial opinion, I don't necessarily know if I was sold on Chris Isaak as an actor. I also am sold on David Bowie as an actor. So the fact that I get like 20 minutes of Chris Isaak and like 5 minutes of David Bowie, I wish that David Bowie had gotten to be a bigger presence in Twin Peaks. And that's a sincere wish because, again, without spoiling anything, David Bowie had passed away before the return happened.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what happens, he couldn't have been in it as David Bowie. Like, so it's a shame.
Now, mind you, I do enjoy seeing someone who I find talent with and seeing their acting chops more. But whether or not that would cause an imbalance in the story itself or what it would come across as,
Yeah.
because he's just a fleeting moment. He could be a dream. We don't know whether or not he's there. I don't know if his presence being added on top of that would take away from that or not, but I have a strong feeling that it would, from my viewing experience. I like him sort of popping in and out as this weird extra mystery element.
One thing I also don't know if I quite like is that if it is set up for a sequel, I don't know how satisfying it is when the sequel doesn't get made, because it kind of hurts how well it stands out on its own. Because do you believe we're given enough evidence to reach a conclusion about Judy?
No.
Or Jeffries, for that matter.
The only time that we get another mention of Judy, actually we get a couple.
Yeah.
We get one in which like Judy Garland is brought up, in which is the actress as well as...
You're referring to Major Briggs?
Major Briggs,
That was in the
yes.
TV show.
Yeah, that was in the TV show.
So
We get a few
earlier.
references.
That was earlier.
Early.
Okay.
Where Judy Garland is
Yeah.
brought up by Major Briggs. And there's also that confusion moment while he's all sorts of drugged up. It was like, Judy.
Yeah.
So there has been flirtation and mention, if not for like this character specifically, the usage of the name Judy. And we know that David Lynch, or at least we can assume with David Lynch, the use or reuse of names inside of later works, whether inspired or not.
It's always a hard thing of
could
like, what
lead
do you
in.
do with it? Because we've commented before that Bobby and Mike are friends who are human beings, teenager kids, and then Bob and Mike are supernatural enemies, formerly on the same team. But like, what does Bobby and Mike have to do with Bob and Mike?
I don't think that any conclusions can be done with Judy, especially with that sort of point. It could be anything.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's some intention on planting these seeds.
My what I'm getting at though is that I don't know how satisfying, like everything else feels so self-contained in this movie.
Yeah.
But like the Philip Jeffries feels like one of the few like loose ends that just doesn't fit the puzzle. And it's like, this feels like it's meant to be from something else. Like, I'm missing the inside joke here.
Now,
I'm missing something for context.
Now, mind you, I really like that because there are some things, such as a cultural standpoint, where putting things that would be either like unsolved or small flaws in your tapestry
Right.
is what makes the unique work. And that's some philosophy I personally stand by myself. So
anytime
I can
you say
enjoy
the
that.
wrong name or don't remember a song,
I'm ruining my tapestry,
you're
yes.
purposefully doing that. It's to
Not
make the
purposefully,
podcast better.
I'm just so good I can do it passively.
Ooh, that's awesome. Make mistakes without even trying to. But no, I don't want to be. I don't want to be taken the wrong way here. I say all these things because I wanted more of Bowie as an actor.
So I already now know, as a spoiler, that the missing pieces isn't all David Bowie. Like the multiple hours or hour that
I mean,
it
I
is,
just said I wanted
isn't
more of
just
Bowie in
constant
the movie.
David Bowie.
I said I wanted more in the movie. Missing Pieces didn't make it into the movie. Missing Pieces wasn't even available for like 12 years.
So it could have been a 12-year delay on David Bowie time.
Anyway, I think also part of my hesitance with this whole section is there's this tendency among a lot of people to just call anything that's like weird Lynchian. It's kind of a cliche term within like movie buff culture.
Yeah.
That Lynch is kind of used like anything that's super surreal or dreamlike, it's Lynch. But this is the worst situation I think I've seen so far between regular Twin Peaks when Lynch was directing or Fire Walk with Me, because again, we haven't done the Lynch films yet for me to criticize those or compliment. This is the most I can see someone accusing Lynch of being weird just to be weird. Like everything that goes on with Jeffries, but also at the convenience store meeting that Jeffries communicates or kind of communicates. We see him juxtaposed with it. That whole situation throws so many things at the viewer's face without enough context to figure anything out that if someone looked at that and said, yeah, that's just pretentious. That's just weird for the sake of being weird and it makes no sense, and it's not really good, I wouldn't have much of a counter. I don't think it's been developed. And that's hard because now we're dealing with the element of if each of those individual eccentricities and the cohesive whole of them together create an effect that works for you as a viewer, good. But if it doesn't, there's nothing else really to back it up. It's all just weird at you at once.
Yeah, honestly, whether it is all weird or there's intention, like half a mystery that sort of lingers around, I'm game for both. I think that even if something ends up being pretentious or the purpose of it is to throw people off, I think that there's still a value in that. I think that there's still something fascinating about that and what that can leave the viewer with. I think that it then becomes a fun ride in some cases.
I think it, again, in some cases to me is the key word.
Yes.
When is it, unique and good that it's abstract and undefinable, and when is it just bad writing, and when is it just kind of like pretentious and nonsense in a bad way? That's all subjective.
I will have all those food on my plate. Thank you very much.
Well, hopefully you have room for the plate on the table. The table is a
Formica.
Formica table.
Formica.
Formica. It is said Formica in the movie, so I'm going to say Formica.
The person who says it is the man from another place.
Green is its color.
Green is its color. Which, by the way, hey, Sam Stanley here. Did you know that the Formica table is very easy to clean, actually? Its material itself is very easy to wipe off any sort of residue left behind. Say, for example, if you had any sort of messy meals, whether it being creamed corn
or blood.
Blood. Yeah. The two foods. The two food groups.
Listener, please email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com or tweet at us at snakeeyedreams1. That's the numeral 1, as in, I have one question for you. What's your favorite meal of the day? Is it blood or is it cream corn?
We look forward to your responses.
In the scenario of the meeting, let's just lay out some information and kind of respond to each thing here.
Yeah.
It is implied that this is what Jeffries has seen. He says he's been to one of their meetings. It was above a convenience store. And he mentions the ring. It's most likely that what we're seeing on the screen is the meeting above the convenience store. The actual location of the whole deal is like super barren. When you compare this to the Red Room that has like those elegant, almost regal curtains, the design pattern of the chevron, this is just like some abandoned warehouse kind of vibe.
Which, by the way, from what it looks like or what it's communicated through scene to scene inside the film, apparently there is the red curtain that is just beyond. It is right there. It's just that this is where all these individuals are coming together to meet at this time.
It has a very like industrial kind of gross, mundane sort of quality to it. None of the sort of mysticism you would associate with a meeting of the Dugpas.
I mean,
it just feels like this is some bunch of hobos above a convenience store in a warehouse.
With the exception of the very well-dressed, what I assume to be a Dugpa, with the white masks, just basically dancing on what seemed to be possibly a smoke machine.
Yeah, so we're going to call that person the jumping man for at least right now with the needle nose, right? Noticeably that is a different person than the grandson.
Yes. But still, he is very animated through his actions as like the conversations continue to go on. Again, it feels like when wearing the mask with the long nose, it is almost like a jester commenting or just saying something on the outskirts.
He also has this sort of weird-looking wooden talisman thingy. What would you... Any thoughts on that?
It looks very similar to the one that the Tremor Boy has later on.
Yes.
I imagine it's something of the natural world. It is something that is of the woods. If I had to really guess, if we take the location nearby where the Black Lodge is set, probably it's a branch or something that came from a sycamore tree.
Okay. Interesting. Why have that?
Why have that? It's oftentimes whenever like holding on to something like that, it's something that is a very nice shorthand for something that's very ritualistic, very almost what some might associate with druidic, in a sense, being connected to nature.
Okay.
But there's also, again, that fun juxtaposition of how well he is dressed. It is almost like a play off of... it's almost like a black and white. It is almost like a merging of opposites right there. Something in which you associate with something, and then the opposite of it when this tells
Well, and also a juxtaposition, the idea of the natural with sort of the earthen wooden talisman versus the artificial or the man-made with the blue static constantly cutting in, the electricity, as well as, again, that sort of very man-made feel of the meeting place itself. The convenience store or whatever location you see this to be, feeling very unnatural. And not in a supernatural sense, but in a man-made sense. The most familiar figures here are definitely the Man from the Place and Bob, who are around that Formica table. The Man from the Place decides to propose, "With this ring, I thee wed." And he does this little laugh, having a good old laugh at the situation. We also get later on, before Jeffrey screams, we see Bob and Man from the Place like entering the Red Room curtain, which you like said is implied to either physically be there just out of sight, or like it's able to phase in at their will, potentially. Or when the stars align, maybe.
Honestly, like, when the stars align, when it's the first 6 months of the year.
The fabled Garmin Bosia, aka Creamed Corn. I made a very definitive point of showing you the DVD version that I have, so I could show you the special feature.
Yep, the special feature, which is only available, it seems, on the DVD. I have the Z to A collection, so this is not available on there.
The Blu-ray Z to A collection is fantastic, has all these amazing features, but there's one blind spot, one missing critical key. And for clarity, this is the New Line DVD, the New Line Home Cinema DVD. There's a special feature where you can click on the icon on the home page of the DVD menu that looks like the logo. Sort of film reel looking logo. And could you describe what happens when you click on that? So if you ever had that DVD of Fire Walk With Me before the Blu-ray's all released, it just keeps looping the creamed corn eating effect for as long as you want it to.
And it's the same scene. Like, the weird thing is that if you look at it long enough, it looks like there's some differences. It looks like it's a different bite, but no, it's the same, like, couple seconds, just looped again and again and again. If you ever wanted to see a man eat creamed corn for as long as you want, I can only recommend the DVD then.
It is the best way to view that particular content. We also have, along with Bob and the Man from the Place, an unknown bearded man who is next to a hollowed-out open TV set. He utters no lines of dialogue, but he does have a gesture he likes to do of the hand going up and down, which is accompanied by like a sort of weird reversed sound effect. What did you make of this particular, I would even say character, image entity?
As can be noted, we have seen some gestures return.
Some clowns.
Gestures. We've seen some gestures return in different forms, and we'll have a fun time talking about Laura Palmer in a bit about that. I don't know if this would have been a gesture that would return at one point. I don't know if this is a situation where, it's a knee slapper, but it's in reverse, so we're serious now. It definitely sets the mood, if anything.
Okay. I don't know, like the expression on the man's face doesn't say it's a knee slapper.
Yeah, exactly. It's the inverse because the sound is backwards, the movement feels backwards.
What's the opposite of a knee slapper?
That.
What does that mean? Like, give me an example of something that's the opposite of a knee slapper.
A knee unslapper. You take back the slaps.
Give me a situation.
When you decide that you want your favorite birthday cake and then they just don't get you a cake at all. So you want to take back the joy of being like, oh boy, it's my birthday.
So you unslap your knee.
So you unslap your knee.
Makes sense. What do you think of the hollowed out TV set?
Hollowed out TV set. It was a TV set that had no form inside. It is hollow, as they would say. No, we've used the iconography of things such as static electricity, the use of a television, and so on. It could be something that's foreboding for, say, for example, the thing that is to come or something that has passed, as concerning with Teresa Banks. It's taking away from the realm that you imagine yourself to be at. This is a realm that's unfamiliar, that's not usually connected to the Black Lodge because, again, there's a distinct lack of that use of electricity. I'm not sure about the lighting. I'm having a hard time remembering about that in general. These are just some general guesses, but overall it is certainly a haunting image, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, considering Lynch's bitterness toward how season 2 turned out, we saw that even in the Log Lady intros throughout the series. It's very tempting to wonder the meta angle again of the hollowed out TV set. Either Lynch again saying, hey, I've taken the TV show and I've gutted it out, or almost like, look what they did to my poor baby. Look what they did.
There's just a lot of TV abuse in this.
There is. It's too much to be, like, not taken seriously. Like, there's too many images of static, of destroying TVs, of things of that nature to not look at that as potentially commentary, considering this is a movie based on a TV show that Lynch himself basically disowned after a few episodes. I kind of wonder about that imagery. Familiar also, Mrs. Tremond and the grandson, although now they are starting to go by Chalfont occasionally. The grandson points ahead. I'm assuming at Bob. It's never quite shown in frame who he's pointing at, but he just says very vaguely, "Fella victim." But again, in relation to whom? Is it the viewer? Is it Bob? Is it Jeffries? Who do you think he's pointing at? Or do you think all these questions, again, don't matter because there's no answer or you're not meant to think about them? I mean, what do you do with it?
I think that you could say that it just is pointing out on the event that is going on. I think that...
Is the victim Twin Peaks after the evil CBS studio executives made us discover who killed Laura Palmer?
No, Garambosia is basically a means of suffering and pain.
Yeah.
So pointing at the event, like whatever that pain is, it had to come from a area. It had to come from a system. So the victim itself is the creamed corn. It is just what they are actively doing, and whoever is under the pressure of the situation that was made into creamed corn, that is the victim. They fell a victim. The meal is the victim.
So in this situation, though, who do you think the victim is they're talking about?
I don't know. It may be... Time is weird enough in
Yeah.
Twin Peaks, especially in the
It
Black Lodge.
It could be Teresa Banks.
It could be Teresa Banks. It could be
Laura.
later on Laura Palmer. It could be someone else that we haven't met yet.
It could be Cooper.
It
I
could-
mean, like, it could be literally anyone.
It is basically whatever that cream corn is, and I think that that is the most important part.
Okay.
It is basically in order to meet in this way, in order to trade this creamed corn, in order to have this pain and sorrow, this event needed a victim. They fell a victim.
Noticeably during this meeting, the grandson lifts up the mask and reveals that underneath there is a monkey face. So the monkey face that would later go on to be saying Judy in a voice that sounds very much like Agent Jeffries. We have the monkey face also shown on the grandson. Any thoughts on that?
You could say that they themselves, since we do have a connection with Jeffries and this monkey face, the people who lie behind the masks, many of the people here, like how Laura Palmer comes, could have also been a victim at one point.
Yeah.
They could have been someone involved with the Black Lodge in one way or another. Having this child also have that sort of face, it could insinuate that something happened with this kid very similar to Jeffries, very similar to Laura Palmer, which makes something more frightening out of the situation. That's why I think it might be alluding to later. Or it could
Jeffries
just...
is so potentially interesting, and it's not ever acted fully upon, but like even the fact that he wears a white suit, you know, like
Yeah.
considering everyone else in the FBI is wearing a black suit, he comes in wearing a white suit. He's the one pointing out to Cooper, like, who do you think that is?
He's the quirky guy of the office.
He's the quirky guy. I mean, look at the people around him. He's the quirky guy. I'm just saying. But like, that's the thing where it's like, you know, you look at the kid wearing the white mask, Jeffrey's wearing the white suit. Jeffrey's so insistent we're not going to talk about Judy, but then when the mask is removed, there's a scared little monkey inside whispering Judy. Like, again, you could take that to mean something.
Yeah,
he could have fallen a victim.
Yeah.
But we don't know. It's just implications.
It's something that there's more truth in the form that lies within the darkness that is a little bit intangible to us, especially now. So, no, it makes things a little bit more interesting. If anything, if at the end of the day, it definitely is yet another good mood setter.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that mood setter might be the like optimum word for this whole first 30 minutes that, by the way, we are meticulously going through right now.
Piece by piece.
I hope the listener understands then why we struggle to do the whole entire movie in one podcast episode.
Hi, guys. Welcome to the Twin Peaks 24-hour podcast where you're going to sit with us forever and ever.
Honestly, listener, if you have any thoughts or opinions you want to share on this format for the podcast, I'd be interested to know. We're going to be looking ahead to pretty much all the David Lynch films after this.
Yep.
And so we're going to be a movie podcast for a while. I don't know whether we're going to go this deep dive into every single movie, if it's going to be in multiple parts, if it's going to be one. we don't know that stuff. We're still figuring it out.
In fact, like we recently did a book one and we had to separate that into 2 parts for the length. I'm even looking at some of the other books at this time. I've spoken to Kalil on how we're going to handle the special features of Twin Peaks. We're going to be covering Twin Peaks as if like Twin Peaks is covered upon us from what I'm seeing so far.
So as many like opinions as we can get, it'll give us more to think about.
Yeah, just how should we structure this strange amorphous thing we call Twin Peaks?
Yeah, and if you don't feel like comfortable posting thoughts on YouTube or on a tweet, you can email us, again, snakeeyedreams@gmail.com. Really, it helps for the feedback.
Yes.
The last figure that I remember seeing that seemed important from the meeting was this random mouth in the darkness that says the word we've been imitating the whole entire time, electricity. We get that kind of correlated, I think, with the Fat Trout electric pole, which has like a number 6, or maybe it's an upside down 9. What's the difference? And then the faint whooping noise we've talked about with the Man from Another Place. I don't know if the mouth matters. I don't know if whoever this is in the darkness matters. But that electricity thing is so important to this movie.
I think everyone matters, Kalil. I think every single person matters. How do you feel about that?
I think Agent Jeffries matters. So when he tells us that he sure as HE double hockey sticks wants to tell them everything,
Yeah.
I think he means it. But Jeffrey says he doesn't have a whole lot to go on.
We're not going to talk about Judy, though.
He says, "Oh, believe me, I followed." So, like, he tried. He's been following these things, but he's not getting answers.
Yeah, I think that you could almost parallel that with a bit of Cooper himself. Like, he like constantly like, oh yeah, no, I followed. I tried my best to go on this case, whatever this mysterious case was, whether it was Blue Rose or not. It is definitely interesting to hear the folly of this man.
Yeah, and the seeming like revelation he has, the one thing he says that's pretty certain, like he questions, who do you think this is with Cooper? He seems to question things about Judy implicitly, but the thing he's most confident that he just says is that it was a dream. We live inside a dream. Now, you and I have watched Wizard of Oz.
We have.
We have commented before about the aspect with Ben, and his literal invocation of that after his Civil War fugue state.
Yeah.
The idea of living inside of a dream is interesting for this film because there's obviously a lot here with dreaming in Twin Peaks already. There's a lot of things about what's real and what's not real, what's hazy, what's not hazy. But it's never in this movie so literal as, oh, if you just wake up, you'll find out that it was all a dream, all after all. It doesn't appear to mean that in the context of this movie.
No, and I think that using things such as coffee or caffeine, especially retroactively looking back into Twin Peaks, trying to keep yourself inside of this waking world, trying your best to live inside of these moments at this time to try to get and obsess over these little things, as opposed towards working with what your body naturally deals with. Mostly our perceptions itself is its own reality. Everything else is just a series of events, whether it's memorable or not. A dream can be recognized as reality itself very easily, and vice versa. It is definitely a question I am sure that is very fun in one's own insights on what is real and what is not.
Well, and it's also curiosity when he says, it was a dream, we live inside a dream. Who's the we? When he says it was, it's past tense, but then he says we live, that's present tense. So, like, he's talking at this point to Gordon, and he's talking to Albert, and he might be talking to Cooper if Cooper's there.
But who is the we? Like, again, like, I'm thinking, like,
viewer?
large scale, like,
Well,
we live inside a scale.
That's what I'm getting at, is that there's so many different layers to this. He could be referring to the dream being the idea that Cooper, himself, the people in the convenience store, belong to an alternate reality.
A dream.
A dream world. That the convenience store area literally is a dream world. The Man from Another Place, the song that goes with him is Dance of the Dream Man. When does Cooper first experience it? In a dream. What happens when Cooper leaves the Red Room? He's on the ground, passed out. So is Annie. The dream element comes into play. So the idea of the Red Room being associated, the spirits being associated with dreams, that's like one layer.
Yes.
Another layer would be that it's everyone in the Twin Peaks world. Either because, A, they live in a dream because they're a TV show. Like, the awareness that Jeffries has, like, we are literally fictional characters, Agent Gordon Cole, sir. Hell, God, baby, damn, no, I'm a script. Like, he might realize that they're in fiction, that TV, I mean, they call it movie magic, that it's just, again, dreams put to electricity on the screen. Then there's the layer of, okay, it's bigger than the Lodge. It's bigger than the characters in Twin Peaks. He could be referring to human life.
Yes, as I mentioned before, where the waking world itself could be interpreted as a dream.
Now, which one do you find the most compelling?
There's also D, which is probably the...
1, 2, 3, and D.
Yes. It sounds like we're building up higher and higher.
Yeah.
I'm going back into a super micro scale. This could just be Gordon Cole's dream.
Yes.
This could just be specifically this man. We all live inside of a dream. We're in your dream right now. This
So
is your
who all lives
perception.
in Gordon Cole's dream, if that's the case?
Currently, the...
Like, is all of Twin Peaks Gordon Cole's dream, or just this situation?
We could say this situation. So specifically in this moment, it's Gordon Cole, Cooper, Albert Rosenfeld, Jeffries, and unnamed security guard. All 5 of those people are in his current dream.
Most important is the unnamed security guard.
So it could be that small scale. It could be large scale. For me, I think that the two that draw me in the largest is one being the world scale, the reality scale, the philosophical or the spiritual scale, because it lines up well with the use of caffeine and how that can be considered a drug and can consider more taboo in those elements. I also am drawn to the idea of, again, the Doug Puzz, the people from the other room, the Black Lodge, Dale Cooper, as well as Jeffries, being present and saying that we live inside of a dream. This is the place that we come from. I went too far in. I was too far gone, try to find answers, and now in presence, I now live inside of a dream.
I land somewhere in between layer 3 and 4, I guess, where...
Layer 3 and D.
Again, based on the information we have in the show so far. Not based on any of the books we haven't read or movies we haven't seen or The Return we haven't talked about.
Yes.
I lean toward the side at the moment then of... It's a combination of the sort of philosophy that... I'm going to be pretentious, use 2 Shakespeare quotes, okay?
Do it! Shake
on.
that spear. William that bard. Bob that bard. William is another form of Bob, right? No, that's Will. Will that bard.
So the first quote, that I had to look him up to make sure you get the wording right. So I want to be very clear for the audio quality here. I didn't just know these off the top of my head, but I know the idea of them. The first element that makes me think of sort of the meta-narrative angle, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have the exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, which is from As You Like It. The idea that everyone is merely an actor, and it kind of takes on a double meaning then, because when Shakespeare says it, it is a meta thing, because it's said in a play. Like, it's a character scripted to say, we're all actors. And they literally are. I think when people quote that thing from Shakespeare, they just attribute it to William Shakespeare without the context of it's kind of a joke when it's said in the play.
Okay.
Because, again, it's actors saying they're actors. So in the context of Twin Peaks, I kind of think that maybe that's what's going on here, too, where it's saying that we are all living in a dream, referring to people at large, but then the inside joke here is that these characters are especially living in a dream because they're fictional. And then the other quote that it reminded me of is from Hamlet. Hamlet's the one who says it in Hamlet. And he says, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. So the idea that there are more things out there in the sort of spiritual dream world than we could ever possibly imagine, that we are living in a small little microcosm of a greater universe. It reminds me of the ending of Men in Black. I think it's Men in Black 1, where it zooms out on their solar system and they're a marble being like playing this game of marbles by these giant aliens. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it marbles, right? It's not golf?
I'm pretty sure it's marbles too, but it's been so long that
Anyway,
it might just be influencing my memory.
That's my Shakespearean Men in Black mindset going into that idea.
Yes.
I lean toward that angle given what we've seen so far.
You lean into that angle, that Robert angle, if you will. Angles. Robert Angles. That's the joke. Clap.
And as soon as Jeffries is able to communicate this stuff, he starts disappearing in front of them.
Yep.
And the front desk tells Albert that Philip Jeffries was never there.
Mm-hmm.
So they all saw him, but he wasn't actually there.
Yep. And when they're looking over in footage in the security room,
Yeah.
it seems that it's also the fun case looking back on footage. And again, situation, Cooper talks.
Well, but that's the thing that's interesting, though, is that the footage, he is on the tape.
Yeah.
Which, again, electricity, if Jeffries was almost like imagining a spirit, right?
Yeah.
He was able to tune into the frequency of their world for just a moment. Like when you're trying to tune a radio and you get those little staticky impressions of a radio station, and it's like just barely kind of flickering in and out.
Yeah.
That's what Jeffries was doing, right? Like he was just there for a moment, a little flicker. You couldn't physically prove he was there. Only some people saw it who were on that frequency too. But when they look at the electric waves, when they look at what's caught on tape, he's there.
Yes. And I also enjoy the fact that they do make a comment being like, kind of like talking about Chet Desmond in the moment. And there is someone who is in a very similar coat to some of the detective operatives walking straight to the door. Whether intentional or not, that's fascinating too. I wonder if there's some sort of frequency going on with that as well.
Yeah, if you don't know what we're talking about, I would suggest kind of going back to that section. It's hard to describe, but...
Yep, on the right monitor, you'll notice someone who has a striking appearance, if you will walk to the door.
It's very similar without ever actually being followed up on.
Yes.
The last thing that really happens in Philadelphia in the movie is a little bit later. We start to meet Laura Palmer, and it cuts to Cooper with Albert. This is a situation where Cooper seems very much there. Not a doppelganger Cooper. Or an imitation or a hazy specter or whatever the situation might be.
It's a Coop.
He's talking normally to a person who can hear normally. And Cooper is telling Albert that the killer will strike again and that Albert will help him catch the killer. Albert decides, okay, we're going to test that for the record then, and starts asking Cooper a series of questions.
Okay.
Do you think the questions and answers that were given were fair?
I think that trying to press him for information, absolutely. I think that he probably knows Cooper enough, and there's just some information that would be necessary if they're trying to locate someone. I think especially inside of Albert's, what I feel is genuine response when he's like giving him information, it's just like, yeah, no, it's a female. She's in high school.
Blonde.
She's blonde. She is having problems with drugs. And then Albert's just like, well, damn, Coop, that's just basically half the nation right there.
Yeah, and to Albert's defense, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I would almost call it social commentary, but not enough really follows up on it for me to really think it's that profound. But the idea that most of us kind of just understand that there are so many high school girls in the 90s and currently who are experiencing these sort of issues, crying out for help. And so to say that that's your criteria of who this is going to be is way too vague. There are way too many people across the country that could be.
Yep, and I do think that the follow-up question in which is like, what's she doing right now? I think that there's enough trust with how they've worked together that Albert does believe in Cooper's abilities. But it also is another, what I would call almost unhelpful amount of information.
Because Cooper says right now she's preparing a great abundance of food. Which, yes, Laura is doing the Meals on Wheels thing right now.
It's a great transition and goes into it, but I'm just imagining Albert says, well, great. Oh, she eats. She has food.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you think the
Case
conversation went
closed.
much further than that?
I don't think it went much further. I think either Albert made a final bit of commentary or he just like left it be, just being like, I'm not going to get in useful information at the moment. Time will tell.
In terms of Dale Cooper overall, you'll notice he has a much smaller role in this movie than he did in the show.
Yes.
Reportedly, Kyle MacLachlan wanted the smaller role himself because he wanted to avoid being typecast. He was afraid that if he kept being linked to Twin Peaks for so long, that'd be all he's known for. According to the Twin Peaks wiki, the script and plans for the film were changed to reduce his role from what was originally planned. Which, supposedly, would mean that Cooper's less involvement, Cooper's retraction from the story, is what led to Agent Chet Desmond being so prominent. Of course, we don't know what the show would have been like if Cooper had been in there more. You know, this is all based on kind of our understanding of what happened. Do you like Cooper's role in Fire Walk with Me? Do you think he should have been there less, more? in a different way. He's like the face of Twin Peaks, and he has this kind of weird extra element in the show that he doesn't really do a lot, but he's there for some things.
I think that if we were to see more Cooper inside of this, we would likely see him replace Chet Desmond. I think that would have been the initial role. And if there's one thing that I do enjoy, it's just bigger world building, bring in some more characters and give us some more perspective. It's why I did enjoy some of the small snippets that may have never been finished with things like Twin Peaks, with things like Little Nicky, because I like that expansion. I think that, again, Chet Desmond works so well with Sam Stanley. Maybe there would have been Cooper with Stanley that I don't think would have worked as well. Just imagine him in these similar situations, and I think that there may have been more reserved points or a side of Cooper we'd never seen.
Right.
How that would feel, or if there would be a feel of inconsistency, I don't know. This is a hypothetical universe.
I know you're not a huge fan of all hypotheticals like that.
No, I'm never a fan of hypotheticals.
I still have to ask it now and then.
That's fine.
And why remind the listener, why do you hate hypotheticals like that?
Because in the end, whatever is brought forward inside of something such as a story, I think hypotheticals are fun to imagine. I think that they can lead into some fun content. I think that there's fantastic fan fictions out there for it, but I don't think that it should be something that one should mourn over, or someone should be like, man, what about the reality that was this way?
So how I mourn after Hank Jennings.
Yes. For me, I think that the use of narrative and how a story can carry you forward is like a trip on a train. You find various stops that you're at, and the conclusion will be whatever destination you end up at. And I do enjoy seeing what something is rather than what it could be, because the mind is amazing with imagination. It could blow something out of proportion and be like, man, that would have been great. Or see something and say, man, that would have been horrible. But they could have been the series and the amount of possibilities and the amount of executions. It's unfathomable. And at that point, I'm no longer looking into the work itself. I'm not taking in those sights anymore. I'm sitting in my car just thinking without opening the door for myself and seeing what this train is all about. So that's my personal take.
And let it be known for the content we create that I do not agree with that for myself. And I emphasize that because it's going to pop up, whether it's in the podcast or in our other videos we do. Like, I have 2 videos planned right now, one pretty far in production and one that's kind of more in the planning stages, and both of them are very hypothetical related.
Yes.
Both of them are very what if. One is more what if for the playful fanfiction-y side, and then one is more what if in the sense of the current version isn't that good, I wish it was like this instead. I find a lot of value in looking at alternatives and thinking about alternatives, because I think that that's vital to criticism. I think that to view work critically, you have to be willing and open to look at what was chosen as not necessarily an innate good. That what was chosen was one of many, many possibilities, and to ask yourself, was that the right choice? Were there better options available on the table? And you have to be realistic about it. When I say I mourn Hank Jennings, I think that there was potential that was developed and squandered, and I do think thinking about that what if situation helps me realize, okay, Twin Peaks could have been better than it already is, for my tastes. So I'm kind of opposite in that. With regards to Cooper specifically, when I first watched Fire Walk with Me years ago, I would have wanted more Cooper, because 1, he's my favorite character, and 2, there were so many mysteries lingering by the end of the show that I was dying to know, okay, what's going on with Cooper? Is Bob there? Like, what happened to Annie? Like, I'd be dying to know those things. Yeah. And this movie teases that. It teases that idea with Annie in the bed. It teases that idea with Cooper. Is he a dream? Who do you think that is? You know, it teases it. But this wasn't the movie that was going to decide those things. So for what this movie became, and as I come to kind of realize, no, this is mostly about Teresa Banks and mostly about Laura Palmer. The other stuff is not as essential. That I've kind of come to believe that, yeah, if there had been more Cooper, it would have been a different movie and it would have imbalanced what was there. I like having a movie version of Laura's story. This is just such a weird movie in general, though, because if the movie had started a half hour later and just been Laura the whole way through, it would have made sense. The 30 minutes in Deer Meadow is kind of just like a weird prologue that, like you said, you can almost view separate. The only reason this division for the podcast really makes sense is because there's that really clear perforated line. I mean, literally it cuts to the sign of Twin Peaks with the Twin Peaks theme playing, and then Laura enters right after that. So it's hard because, like, I don't want more Cooper in this version of the movie, but the stuff we had in the first 30 minutes, I don't know. Maybe could have been more Cooper, but I don't know. I don't want to mess with that too much. So I don't know. Again, Bowie's the one I'd be more curious about with what they had developed. Then there's still the idea of what even is Cooper with what we're given, where I'm still kind of led to believe that everything except for Cooper talking to Albert and Cooper in Deer Meadow might have been some form of vision or dream, like Gordon Cole seeing him, Laura obviously seeing him and Annie. There's a sense of dream reality, I think, happening with those encounters. We do see him like clearly interacting in Deer Meadow. So we do get a glimpse then of what he might have been like if he would have been instead of Chet Desmond. Carl Rod shows up, briefs Cooper on what all happened. Cooper apologizes for waking Carl Rod very politely.
Yes.
Carl Rod says he was having a bad dream anyway. Cooper starts walking in what is apparently the wrong direction for Deputy Cliff's trailer.
Which, by the way, yes, it's both emphasized, just being like, yeah, no, Cliff's trailer over there.
And Cooper says he isn't going that way. Where the hell are you going? I'm going over here.
So the recently healed trailer manager continues to follow him.
I'm starting to think that the Band-Aid was not for an external wound, but for all the headaches he's been given by the population.
It had blood.
It's hurting his head really badly from the inside. Internal brain bleeding.
External
That'd give you bad dreams.
But no, they go off to the old lot in which once belonged to the Chalfonts, who may or may not be Treymons.
Yes. And that is where Chet Desmond had disappeared, because last we saw him as a viewer and last anyone had seen him, he was reaching underneath there for the ring.
Which we can imagine there either was a coincidence or a series of events that happened afterwards with Chet Desmond, because his vehicle was across from the Chalfonts area. Whether someone took his keys, whether he personally drove it over there, something happened there, and that dirty old car at the moment has like this, what could be potentially red lipstick or some weird means of paint, spells out Let's Rock in a very specific font that almost harkens to things such as neon lights.
Which, do you remember where Let's Rock was?
I don't recall Let's Rock. I know Hap's Diner has a very similar sort of loop-de-loop sort of design. I don't know if that's there.
It is a quote from The Man from Their Place.
What?
It is a quote from The Man from Their Place.
Please go on. When did this happen? Why would he say Let's Rock?
I believe this was in the episode he first appeared in, which would either be the international pilot or episode 2 of the original.
Okay, so it's basically, Let's Rock. Okay. Still don't know the full connection, but I still find that fascinating.
It's kind of one of those phrases that would be associated with him.
Yes.
Which would lead us to believe, hey, Black Lodge resident has been here.
We didn't get that enough with the Chalfont, so we needed to really cement that down.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I find the specific phrase as well as the appearance of it very fascinating. Just because, again, it's got that neon look to it. The overall tone of it really harkens to that very diner-esque feel. Can you imagine that at the Bang Bang Bar?
The Let's Rock?
Yes.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying about the font. I don't know how to describe it, but it has a sort of neon quality to it. Now for a rendition of that song I was saying earlier, I said, a little ditty about Jack and Irene. Now we got a little ditty about Cooper and Diane. So it kind of like mixes the two together and you form the actual song. You know what I'm saying?
No, I don't know this song.
Jack and Diane. It's Jack and Diane, but earlier we had Jack and Irene. Now we have Cooper and Diane. So if you mix the two, you get the actual.
You have a mess, yes.
So he's talking to Diane. He says that the case is giving him a strange feeling. He remarks that this is one of Cole's Blue Rose cases. He has also the feeling that the killer will strike again, but who knows where or when. That is where we get our cut to 1 year later.
Yes.
Main theme playing. 34 minutes in, Laura Palmer makes her appearance.
Yes, as far as things go, like the usage of the color blue, specifically for electricity on the frizz, as well as the general rose, the fact that Gordon Cole listens through with electricity, the amounts that this can go into, there can be definitely an argument, or at least in my crazy mind, that there might be something malicious going on Gordon Cole's side. Because again, he's sending off people on these sort of errands, these sort of quests that, yes, do require attention, but it's the specificness of them on this little trail that is led behind with these blue roses.
This is the part where I mentioned. That Gordon Cole is played by David Lynch, who's the director. And if we're looking at a meta sort of reading of the film, isn't it kind of interesting to think about the director having bad intentions to cause darkness, and also the idea that the director is experiencing a dream and is like hearing dream logic of Cooper, and that's kind of the origin of the whole story. You could do something with that.
You could do something with a lot of this. All I'm saying is that...
Should we trust David Lynch is basically the question.
At the end of the day, I think that the better question is, should we trust Gordon Cole? Because we can connect David Lynch outside of that, but Gordon Cole is still at least somewhat suspicious.
I just think it's almost impossible to separate Gordon Cole from David Lynch.
And
the director of the FBI and the director of the movie.
And I'm in my train. I can separate it. I think that there are connections. I think you can do something with it, but I think that there's still a value in judging the narrative on like the logic of, well, the narrative alone.
I think the logic of the narrative is meta inherently, though. That's part of the problem, is that I think it's not feasible to fully separate them.
I think that is. But I think that there's no problem here unless one perceives a problem.
Same way looking at Bowie and Isaac as the two choices for these new FBI agents. Granted, as far as I know, Sutherland hasn't had an extensive music career in the past, but choosing both Bowie and Isaac, both musicians, as your new prominent FBI characters who disappear mysteriously under the banner of Let's Rock.
I think that certainly is a connection one can make, and I think that's fun. But I also cannot, put away the idea of the characters existing in this realm, existing in this world. Whatever David Bowie means to the greater world, if they just look alike at the end of the day. I think that at the very least, to put one inside of that dreamlike mindset, if there's no solution I can ever come across, is still a boon that can be applied to the media itself. If I can't find the answers and it still feels like a dream, is that still not a success? If that is something that I am entertained by the media.
This is going to be a dumb analogy, but it also is a very apt analogy, I think. My point of view is that looking at Gordon Cole as a fictional character that's just Gordon Cole, and looking at Gordon Cole as literally David Lynch and not a fictional character, it's the difference between the right and the blue lens of a 3D glasses. When you're watching a 3D movie, you want to look through both. But if you want to see some cool effects, you close one eye and look for a while, close the other eye, look for a while. But the full experience, both eyes open, baby.
Yeah, no, I think that if you especially apply that, oh God.
I had to.
I think that's great. I think that's a great assessment on it.
Well, thank you.
No, it's great. And the color blue especially.
See, we can now end this podcast with a sense of unity, synchronicity. Oh, I used a fancy big boy word.
Good job, Dick Jermaine.
We're going to end on that note. I do have a wonderful and strange question of the week, although I do wonder if you've already kind of implied an answer to it.
Let's go for it. I might change the answer entirely.
So
I'm a messenger of chaos.
My question is a two-parter. Who is Judy, and why can't we talk about her?
Judy is, so far, being that has some attachment to someone such as Jeffries, but I don't think that it needs to be fully answered. I think that having that sense of motivation or having that sense of baggage with this character is the most important message of it, that we can, again, continue to make little links here and there on what the Black Lodge means or the residents of the Black Lodge. I think that Judy herself, her past, her whole entire presence, you could call that almost either a red herring or you could call it something in which is Chekhov's gun. It could be one or the other. Chekhov's Judy. It's really dependent on either how people interpret this media or how it's going to be handled in the future, dependent on which side you lean on how canon anything is going forward.
Well, and I would assume that you, being who you are, do not particularly care one way or the other whether Judy is ever brought up again.
Yes.
If Agent Jeffries is never brought up and Judy's never brought up again, you'll be just as neutrally satisfied as if it is brought up again.
If never brought up again, Judy will be the gum that I would wish would come back in style, but it's still
so
nice to chew on.
You do wish to come back in style?
I don't mind if it comes back in style.
Oh.
It's something that I can chew on, and I can still enjoy for what it is, but if it comes back in style, and I get more Judy gum, I'll still be pleased.
Okay, you're in the trolley cart, okay, and you have two different roads. You have to take one. You said a train. You're using train metaphors.
Train
okay?
metaphors, okay?
You have a lever. One lever, it takes you to the road where there's more Judy content in Twin Peaks, like in the future.
Mm-hmm.
The other track, there's no Judy content. Which track do you take? If you drive in the middle, you're on neither track and you just peter off the edge.
The serious answer to this situation is that, again, the people who are leading the media and make the media, they are at the front end, the conductors. I have no control over that. Whichever path they take, I'll be pleased with, because overall, I'm fascinated on what narrative they bring through. Mm-hmm. I'm very happy with what sort of things that can branch off from that, and where people go off or get dropped off at different stops and create media of their own that creates new tracks. So in truth, I have no control, and I'm game for either one. The joke answer here is I'm going to leap off the train because, again, I refuse to make any of these decisions here.
This is called just like lack of conviction here.
I do have a lack of conviction.
If I was transporting myself back in the past, Samurai Jack style, I would have pulled the lever for more Judy. I would have pulled the lever to have some sort of context. Because as is, I'm looking at this like this is just an undeveloped idea. I want to see where it was going. I want to see if it can turn into something good.
Yeah,
right now, it's just kind of whatever.
If it's extra spaces in the tapestry, I'll admire them all the more. If I see that the tapestry will then soon be filled with Judy, I'll admire it all the more. It's just things that I will likely admire, or things in which I hope to admire in other people's content if I were to make those stops.
I'm going to add a third track to this now, okay? So there's more Judy. There's no Judy.
There's no Judy.
And then there's Dick Tremaine. There's a third path now.
I'm reversing the train. I'm taking it back.
Well, I hope that you take us back with you next episode where we're going to cover the rest of Fire Walk with Me, presumably. We're going to try to get it in one episode.
We'll see how this goes.
I don't even want to know how long this is going to be.
I'm excited.
On just the first 30 minutes.
This is yours and my train. This one we actually have some control on, so I'm excited to see how we take it with this trolley problem.
Crazy. But that's how it goes.
It's a song. Help.